Artistic Japan by Clarence Edgar Edwords from Bohemian San Francisco. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Availle in March 2011. Artistic Japan by Clarence Edgar Edwords from Bohemian San Francisco. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection Number 6. We wish it were in our power to describe a certain dinner as served us in a Japanese restaurant in the days that followed the Great Fire. Desiring to observe in fitting manner a birthday anniversary, we asked a Japanese friend if he could secure admission for a little party at a restaurant noted for serving none but the highest class Japanese. We did not even know where the restaurant was, but had heard of such a place, and when we received word that we would be permitted to have a dinner there, we invited a newspaper friend who was in the city from New York, together with 2 other friends and the Japanese, who was the editor of the Soko Shimbun. He took us to a dwelling house in O'Farrell Street, having given previous notice of our coming. There was nothing on the outside to indicate that it was anything but a residence, but when we were ushered into the large front room we found it beautifully decorated with immense chrysanthemums and glittering with silver and cut glass on a magnificently arranged table. In deference to the fact that all but our Japanese friend were unaccustomed to chopsticks, forks were placed on the table, as well as the little sticks that the Orientals use so deftly. At each place was a beautiful lacquer tray, about 12 by 18 inches, a pair of chopsticks, a fork, and a teaspoon. Before the meal was over, several of us became quite expert in using the chopsticks. When we were seated, in came 2 little Japanese women in full native costume, bearing a service of tea. The cups and saucers were of a most delicate blue and white ware, with teapot to match. Our first cup was taken standing in deference to a Japanese custom where all drank to the host. Then followed sake in little artistic bottles and sake cups that hold not much more than a double tablespoonful. Sake is the Japanese wine made of rice and is taken in liberal quantities. At each serving someone drank to someone else, then a return of the compliment was necessary. Having always heard that Orientals turned menus topsy-turvy, we were not at all surprised when the little serving women brought to each of us 2 silver plates and set them on our trays. These plates contained what appeared to be cake, one seeming to be angel food with icing, and the other fruit cake with the same covering. With these came bowls of soup served in lacquerware, made of glutinous nests of swallows, and also a salad made of shark fins. We ate the soup and salad and found it good, and then made tentative investigation of the cake. To our great surprise we discovered the angel food to be fish, and the icing was shredded and pressed lobster. The fruit cake developed into pressed dark meat of chicken with an icing of pressed and glazed white meat of the same fowl. Following this came the second service of tea, this time in cups of a rare yellow color and beautiful design, with similar teapot. The next course was a mixture of immature vegetables served in a sort of sauté. These were sprouting beans, lentils, peas, and a number of others with which we were unfamiliar. The whole was delicately flavored with a peculiar sauce. After a short wait, during which the sake bottles circulated freely, one of the women came in bearing aloft a large silver tray on which reposed a mammoth crayfish or California lobster. This appeared to be covered with shredded coconut, and when it was placed before the host for serving, he was at loss, for no previous experience told him what to do. It developed that the shredded mass on top was the meat of the lobster which had been removed, leaving the shellfish in perfect form. It was served cold with a peculiar sauce. Now followed the piece de résistance. A tub of water was brought in, and in this was swimming a live fish, apparently of the carp family. After being on view for a few minutes, it was removed, and soon the handmaidens appeared with thinly sliced raw fish, served with soy sauce. Ordinarily, one can imagine nothing more repulsive than a dish of raw fish, but we were tempted and did eat, and found it most delicious, delicate, and with a flavour of raw oysters. Next came the third service of tea, this time in a deep red ware. Then came a dessert of unusual flavour and appearance, followed by preserved ginger and fruit. It must be remembered that during the meal, which lasted from 7 until past midnight, sake was served constantly, yet no one felt its influence in more than a sense of increased exhilaration. It is customary to let the emptied bottles remain on the table until the close of the meal, and there was a mighty showing. It was impossible to eat all that was set before us, but Japanese custom forbids such a breach of etiquette as an indication that the food was not perfection. Consequently, the serving maids appeared bearing 6 carved teak boxes, and placed one at each plate. Into these we arranged the food that was unconsumed, and when we went away we carried it with us. To cap the climax, the Japanese stripped the room of its bounteous decoration of chrysanthemums and placed them into our arms, and we went home loaded with food and flowers. The proprietor and all his household accompanied us to the door with many bows and gesticulations, wishing us best of luck, and we went back to our homes in the desolated city, with the feeling of having been transported to fairyland of the Orient. We discovered later that our Japanese friend was of the family of the Emperor and was here on a diplomatic mission. End of Artistic Japan by Clarence Edgar Edwards.
The Wonderful Meal of Vittles, from Knocking the Neighbors by George Ade. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bill Mosley. The Wonderful Meal of Vittles, from Knocking the Neighbors by George Ade. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection, number 6. Once upon a time, a rugged character from the Middle West was in New York City fixing up a deal. Although he wore overlapping cuffs and a ready-made tie, he had a rating, so a certain promoter with an office in Broad Street found it advisable to make a fuss over him. The promoter invited the prospective Mark to luncheon, and arranged to have the same served in a snug corner, entirely screened by oleanders and palms. The chef received private instructions to throw himself, so he personally supervised a dainty menu. When the visitor entered the far-famed establishment, and found himself entirely protected from the vulgar gaze, he knew that at last he was in the headquarters for sure enough food. "What is it?" he asked, gazing into the liquid amber of the first course. "Turtle soup," replied the host. "We shoot the blamed things just for practice, out our way," said the guest. "But if I went home and told my wife I'd been eating turtle, she wouldn't live with me." So the Alsatian nobleman hurried it away, and substituted a tidbit with crayfish as the principal ornament in the ensemble. "It's a crawdabber!" exclaimed the horrified man from the plains. "I see 10,000,000 of them little cusses every spring, but I wouldn't touch one with a 10-foot pole." To relieve the embarrassing situation, the host gave a sign, and the menials came running with the third course, a tempting array of frog saddles. "A frog is a reptile," said the Hoosier, backing away from the table. "I've heard they were it, but I never believed it. I can go out any morning and gather a carload." The next serving was breast of guinea hen, with mushrooms under glass on the side. "On my farm I've got a lot of these things," said the guest, poking at the guinea hen timidly with his fork. "We use them as alarm clocks, but I'd just as soon eat a turkey buzzard." "How about the mushrooms?" "8 people in our township were poisoned this summer from fooling with that truck. My pasture's speckled with 'em, but we never pick 'em. Most of them are toadstools. I tried a real one once at a K.P. banquet. It tasted a good deal like a rubber glove." The only remaining item before dessert was a tempting salad of watercress. The guest identified it as something that grew in the creek below the spring, and was commonly classified as grass. "Perhaps you had better order for yourself," said the host, as the lowly watercress followed the others into the discard. The guest motioned the waiter to come close, and said, "I want a nice oyster stew and some sparkling burgundy." Moral: a delicacy is something not raised in the same county. End of the wonderful meal of victuals. Recording by Bill Mosley, Frellsburg, Texas, USA.
Canapés by Sarah Tyson Heston Rorer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Bellona Times. Canapés by Sarah Tyson Heston Rorer. These are slices of bread cut into fancy shapes, toasted or quickly fried in hot oil, or they may be spread with butter and browned in a quick oven. One slice only is used for each canapé. The mixture is spread on top, the top garnished, and the canapé used at once. Anchovy Canapés. Cover a round or square of toast with anchovies that have been mashed and seasoned with a little tomato catsup. Put a little chopped celery around the edge as a garnish and send at once to the table. Caviar Canapes. Season the caviar with onion and a very little lemon juice. Spread over a round or square canapé. Put chopped onion around the edge. Garnish the top with a hard-boiled egg. Place on paper mats and send at once to the table. These are used as first course at lunch or dinner. Swedish Canapes. Cut thick slices of whole wheat or graham bread. Trim the crusts and hollow out the centers, being careful not to make a hole all the way through. Pound or mash the hard-boiled yolks of 3 eggs with a tablespoonful of anchovy paste or 2 anchovies, 2 tablespoonfuls of butter, and a dash of lemon juice. Cut a dill pickle lengthwise into slices 1/8 of an inch thick, then put these slices into long strips a ½ inch wide. Cut large pickled beets into strips of the same width. Cut a dozen pimolas into halves. Butter the bread, fill with the paste. Put over the strips of dill pickle, leaving 1 inch between each strip. Cross these with strips of pickled beets. Put half of a pimola into each square. Dish on paper mats. Serve as an appetizer before soup. Chopped tongue canapés. Chop cold cooked tongue very fine. Season it with 2 tablespoonfuls of olive oil and a dusting of pepper. Spread it over the top of a round of toasted bread. Garnish the edge with the small leaves of cress. Put a little grated hard-boiled egg in the center, and send at once to the table. Sardine Canapes. Remove the skin and pound the sardines to a paste. Put a thick layer of this paste over the top of a round of toasted bread. Cut 1 gherkin into very thin slices. Arrange them overlapping around the edge. Put a little finely chopped hard-boiled egg in the center, and they are ready to serve. Fish Canapes. Pound 1/4 pound of cooked fish to a paste. Season it with a few drops of onion juice, a saltspoonful of salt, and a dash of black pepper. Stir into it 2 tablespoonfuls of sauce tartare. Spread this on 6 or 8 rounds of buttered bread browned in the oven. Garnish the tops with grated cucumber and send to the table. Deviled oyster canapes. Cut slices of bread into squares, toast, and remove the crusts. Remove the hard part from a pint of pickled oysters. Place oysters over bread, close together and in rotation. Dust thickly with red pepper. Put over as a thin covering a highly seasoned sauce mayonnaise, and serve. Do not put over a second piece of bread. Pâté de foie gras canapes. For 24 sandwiches, take 1 tureen of foie gras. Remove the fat and mash the foie gras to a perfectly smooth paste, adding gradually 4 tablespoonfuls of soft, not melted, butter. Add a dash of cayenne and a half teaspoonful of salt, and about 10 drops of onion juice, and press the whole through a sieve. Cut slices of bread into fancy shapes and toast. Crescents are very pretty. Cover each slice thickly with this paste. Garnish with hard-boiled white of egg cut into diamonds or tiny crescents, and olives cut into rings. Arrange neatly, and they are ready to serve. Hot Canapés. A canapé is the half of a sandwich, as it were. Minced meats of various kinds are served on 1 slice of bread. In many books they are called uncovered sandwiches. The cold canapés are placed always among the appetizers and served before the soup. They are made of such materials as caviar, sardines, anchovies, pickled oysters, pickled lobster, deviled shrimps, or a mixture of 1 or 2 of these materials. A hot canapé, however, is served in the place of fish, or as an entrée. If they are dressed with either fish or shellfish, they will take the place of that course. When made from chicken, sweetbreads, or game, should be served as an entrée, following the fish. Fish Canapés. Pick apart sufficient cold cooked fish to make a half pint. Rub together 2 level tablespoonfuls of butter and 2 of flour. Add a half pint of milk. Stir until boiling. Add a half teaspoonful of salt, a teaspoonful of soy, a dash of red pepper, and a half saltspoonful of black pepper. When this is hot, add the fish and 4 or 5 nice sliced mushrooms. Stand over hot water, without stirring, until the fish is thoroughly heated. While this is heating, trim the crusts from 6 slices of bread. Toast the one side carefully. Have ready in your pastry bag with a star tube a pint of light mashed potatoes. Press in a rope-like form, or in small rosettes, around the edge of the bread on the untoasted side. Brush the bread with a little melted butter. Put them in the oven until the potatoes and bread are a golden brown. Dish these on square paper mats on individual plates. Fill the centers with the creamed fish and send at once to the table. Canned salmon may be used in the place of fresh boiled fish. Lobster Canapes. 1 3-pound lobster, the yolks of 2 eggs, 2 level tablespoonfuls of butter, 2 level tablespoonfuls of flour, half pint of milk, 1 tablespoonful of chopped parsley, 1 level teaspoonful of salt, 1 saltspoonful of white pepper, 1 pint of mashed potatoes, 6 slices of bread. Toast the bread and arrange the potatoes according to the preceding recipe. Rub the butter and flour together. Add the milk. When boiling, add the seasoning and the lobster. When very hot, stir in carefully the well-beaten yolks of the eggs. Stir this until it is smoking hot, but be careful not to boil, or it will curdle. Fill this on top of the toast that has been garnished with potatoes, dust with chopped parsley, and send to the table. Shrimps may be substituted for lobster. Sweetbread Canapes. 1 pair calves' sweetbreads, half can of mushrooms, 2 level tablespoonfuls of butter, 2 level tablespoonfuls of flour, half pint of milk, half teaspoonful of salt, 1 saltspoonful of pepper. Boil the sweetbreads carefully for 3/4 of an hour. Throw them into cold water. Pick them apart, rejecting the membrane. Chop the mushrooms very fine. Add them to the sweetbreads. Rub the butter and flour together. Add the milk. When boiling, add the salt, pepper, sweetbreads, and mushrooms. Cover and stand over hot water 10 to 15 minutes. Serve them on slices of bread, garnished with mashed potatoes pressed through a star tube. Canapés à la Trinidad. Half the white meat from 1 boiled chicken, 1 pair of sweetbreads, 6 large fresh mushrooms, 2 level tablespoons of butter, 2 level tablespoons of flour, half pint of milk, 2 yolks of hard-boiled eggs, 1 level teaspoonful of salt, 1 saltspoonful of pepper. Cut 12 slices of bread. Trim the crusts so the slices will be of even size. Cut out the centers from 1/2 the slices, leaving a wall of 1 inch. Toast the solid slices. Brush the untoasted edge of the bread with a little white of egg, lay on the rims, and put them in the oven to toast on the upper side. Pick the sweetbreads apart after they are carefully cooked, rejecting the membrane. Slice the mushrooms. Cut the chicken into dice. Put the butter into a saucepan. Add the mushrooms. Toss for a minute until the mushrooms are slightly softened. Then add the flour. Mix and add the milk, salt, and pepper. Cover this on the back part of the stove for 10 or 15 minutes until the mushrooms are cooked. Then add the meat. Stand this over hot water 10 or 15 minutes. The toast should now be done and crisp. Arrange each canapé on a square of lace paper on an individual heated dish. Put the mixture in the center. Garnish with the yolk of the eggs pressed through a sieve. Garnish the very top with a little chopped truffle or a little chopped parsley. These are the handsomest of all hot canapés, and while they are usually served following the soup at dinner, they may be used for the main course at a ladies' luncheon or at a supper. Game Canapés. Cut any pieces of leftover game into dice. Put 2 tablespoonfuls of butter and 2 of flour in a saucepan. Add a half pint of stock. When boiling, add a half can of very fine mushrooms, a tablespoonful of chopped ham, a tablespoonful of chopped parsley, a level teaspoonful of salt, and a saltspoonful of pepper. Bring this to a boil. Add the game. Stand over hot water for 15 or 20 minutes until the game has absorbed part of the sauce. Then add 2 tablespoonfuls of sherry or Madeira. and fill into the square canapes made the same as in preceding recipe. Lamb Canapes. 2 cans or 1 quart of cooked peas, 1 blade of mace, 2 level tablespoons of butter, 2 level tablespoons of flour, ½ pint of stock, 1 teaspoonful of kitchen bouquet, ½ teaspoonful of salt, 1 tablespoonful of chopped onion, 2 tablespoonfuls of claret, 1 saltspoonful of pepper. Put the butter and onion in a saucepan, shake it over the fire, then add the cold boiled lamb, cut into blocks. You should have 1 pint. When this is boiling, add all the seasoning and stand the mixture over hot water on the back of the stove while you make the canapés. Press the peas through a sieve. The pulp must be quite dry. Add to it a palatable seasoning of salt and pepper, and 1 or 2 tablespoonfuls of melted butter. Put these in a pastry bag. Toast the bread on one side, put the peas around in rope-like form or roses on the untoasted side, making a border sufficiently high to hold the lamb. Stand in the oven until the bread is carefully toasted. Arrange them on lace papers on heated plates. Fill the center with the lamb mixture and send to the table. End of Canapés by Sarah Tyson Heston Rorer.
Twopenny Dinners from The Little Vanities of Mrs. Whittaker by John Strange Winter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rosie. Twopenny Dinners from The Little Vanities of Mrs. Whittaker by John Strange Winter. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection No. 6. Possession to some natures seems always to demand value in what is possessed. To others it has exactly the opposite effect. Julia duly implanted in her parents' minds the preliminary idea that a change from Ye Den might be desirable. But the Whittakers did not leave the park just then, for it was only a few days after the conversation between the 2 girls on the subject of removal that quiet, unoriginal Maudie cast a veritable bombshell into the family circle. For Maudie got engaged to be married. I have spoken earlier in this story of a house in the immediate neighborhood of Ye Den, which was called Ingleside, and I have just mentioned a family of the name of Marksby. The Marksbys lived at Ingleside, and Ingleside was almost exactly opposite to Ye Den. The Marksbys, indeed, were next-door neighbors of the McQuades. They had not very long been in possession of that desirable residence, and, mind you, Ingleside was a most desirable residence, one of the best to be found in the length and breadth of the park. The family consisted of the father and mother, 2 daughters, and a son. Mr. Marksby, as far as the park was concerned, was that mysterious something in the city which covers such a multitude of sins, or if not sins, at least of blemishes, social and otherwise. They did themselves and their neighbors extremely well, kept good class servants, had the smartest window curtains and flower boxes in the park, went to church regularly, gave largely in charity, and entertained freely. What wonder that, in their case, people did not too closely inquire into the exact definition of something in the city. From the very first it had been Maudie rather than Julia who had caught on with the Marksbys. The Marksby girls were quiet and singularly unassuming, and as Maudie Whittaker grew older she was attracted, perhaps because of Julia's excessive energy, by quietness rather than the reverse, and was indeed herself a girl of singularly few words. But if the Marksby girls were quiet, then young Harry Marksby did not share their nature. He was himself the gayest of the gay, one who, a century ago, would have been called an agreeable rattle. Indeed, he was a young man who prided himself on stirring things up. He by no means approved of the fact that his father and mother had turned their backs upon convenient Bayswater in favor of the more distant park. He was a young man who worked hard when he worked, and who abandoned himself to amusement when he was not working. But he was a sensible young man, and did not see the force of burning the candle at both ends, so that he stayed a great deal more at home in the evenings than many a young man of his age and general proclivities would have done. and thus it was that he came somehow to fall in love with Regina Whittaker's eldest girl. And, as I said, the news fell upon the Whittaker family like a bombshell. Not that they were displeased. Mr. and Mrs. Whittaker had been too happy in their own married life to grudge either of their young girls entering upon the same joys. But they had not seen it coming. Parents are often like that, and so the news came upon them with startling suddenness. "I am not surprised, though," said Regina to her husband and Julia, when the great news had been broached, and Harry Marksby had gone to seek his lady-love in the seclusion of the girl's own sitting-room, "I am not surprised. She is very beautiful." "Oh, mother, how can you stuff her up like that?" cried Julia. "Nobody thinks Maudie very beautiful but yourself, not even Harry. You shouldn't do it, dear. It gives us such a wrong idea of ourselves, or it might do if we hadn't got the sense to see what we see in our looking-glasses." "Your modesty," said Regina, "is most becoming. I honour and admire you for it." "I'm off to my housekeeping class," said Julia, whisking herself out of the room. "That is the most wonderful thing about our girls," said Regina to Alfred, when they found themselves alone. "That is the most wonderful thing about our girls, their utter absence of self-consciousness. Beauty has never been a bane to them, because they have never had a vain thought between them. It is a beautiful and wonderful thing." "They're good-looking enough," said Alfred, "but they'll never, either of them, be a patch upon you, dearest." "Upon me!" She blushed rosy red in spite of her 50 and odd years. "Why, Alfie, looks were never my strong point. They get their looks from you." "Nobody but yourself ever thought so, Queenie," said Alfred Whittaker, with an indulgent glance at his wife, "and everybody may not think of our girls just as you do." "And as you do, Alfie?" "And as I do. All the same, I don't know that I should call them beautiful myself. They're good-looking, wholesome, straight, clean, desirable girls, as good as gold and as merry as grigs. By the way," he added, "the Marksbys must be very well off." "Indeed! What makes you think so?" "From what he told me of his circumstances." "But what are the Marksbys?" asked Regina. "He's in his father's business." "But what is his father's business?" Alfred Whittaker stretched out his hand and took hold of his wife's. "Queenie," he said, "we have never been very proud people, have we?" "I hope we have always had proper pride, and no more," said Regina. "He is a nice young chap," Alfred went on, as if he were following out a train of thought, "and Maudie seems to be very much taken with him." "Alfie," said Regina in a tone of apprehension, "you are trying to break something to me." "Well, in one sense I am," he said, smiling, "and on the other hand I am not. Myself I believe in honest character and good solid comfort before all other considerations, and I feel that you will be sensible and do the same. Maudie has still to learn, as far as I know, the exact nature of the way in which the Marksbys' money is made." "Go on," said Regina impatiently. "Well, to go on," said Mr. Whittaker, "is to let the blow fall without any further fuss." "Let it fall!" cried Regina in a tone of tragedy. "Marksby," returned Alfred, "is their private name. They trade under a different one." "Yes?" "And Marksby," went on Alfred slowly, "is the Twopenny Dinner King." "The Twopenny Dinner King!" cried Regina. "You mean they sell twopenny dinners?" "Yes, Queenie, twopenny dinners. I am told they are excellent. Indeed, young Harry told me so himself just now. He has invited me to go down and have lunch with him one day, and he promises he will give me the regular twopenny fare, not by way of entertaining me, but rather in order to show me that it really could be done at such a price." And does Harry wear an apron and serve twopenny dinners?" "No, no, the concern's too big for that," Mr. Whittaker replied. "He has never done anything of that kind. It's a regular going concern. They employ hundreds of hands, make all their own sausages, make their own beef, mutton, veal, pork, and ham pies, cook their own potatoes and green vegetables. They've got about 30 of these shops. Bundaby's eating houses, they are called. They must be coining money." "My daughter married to a sausage maker!" said Regina in a bewildered tone. "There's nothing in that," Alfred Whittaker rejoined. "There's nothing in that, my dear girl, provided he makes his sausages good and wholesome and enough of 'em. But I was afraid it would be a bit of a blow to you." My daughter married to a sausage maker," Regina repeated. "Now, come, Queenie, you mustn't. You mustn't. Hang it all, I don't know what you mustn't do. The girl fancies the boy, and he has plenty of money. He's a nice, gentlemanly chap, and she'll live in style. He's going to have a motor car. She'll live in far better style than we've ever done." "But you are not a sausage maker," said Regina. "Alfie, Alfie, I'm afraid I couldn't have married you if you had been a sausage maker." The word sausage seemed positively to stick in Regina's throat. "Queenie," said Alfred, "you know perfectly well that what I was had nothing to do with your feelings towards me. If I had been a crossing sweeper—" "Alfie," said she, interrupting him, "a duke might sweep a crossing and sweep it nobly, and remain a duke, unsullied and unsoiled, but a duke would never make sausages." "No, but sausages may make a duke," said Alfred promptly. "I know just how you feel, my dear girl. I felt a sort of a lump come in my throat myself when he told me. But he was frank and unashamed. I should hate one of my girls to marry a man who was ashamed of his calling, whatever it was." "My noble Alfred!" cried Regina. "I don't know that I'm particularly noble," said Alfred. "I never feel it if I am. I'm afraid it's only your eyes that see me in such a light. But I did feel a bit of a lump in my throat, a sort of extra big stone in my gizzard, don't you know. And then it came over me that it is the girl's own choice, and that it is not for me to damp it." "But Maudie doesn't know." "In a way she does, and in another way she doesn't. I asked young Harry if he had told her the exact nature of his business. He said no, he hadn't. He had told her he was in business in the city, that they had a great many branches, but he had not told her the exact nature of it. We never think about it, he said, excepting as the business, and if our friends don't know that Bundaby's eating houses belong to us, well, we don't see why we should enlighten them." "If nobody knows—" began Regina. "Come, come, old lady, you'll have to swallow it, and we shall have to break it to the little girl, unless young Harry does it himself." It was 11 o'clock before they had any opportunity of speaking on the subject to Maudie. Indeed, they were still talking the affair over when they heard the pair come into the hall, and Maudie opened the door of the room in which they were sitting. "Yes, I must go now," said Harry Marksby. "I've got to be up so fearfully early in the morning. Tomorrow night I shall be able to stay a bit later." He came in, as he said, just to say good night, and his way of saying good night to Maudie's mother did a good deal to wipe the word sausage off the slate of Regina's impressionability. "I've only come in for a minute, Mrs. Whittaker," he said. "I must be off home, because I've got to be up awfully early in the morning. I made half a dozen business appointments for tomorrow ever so early, before I knew that Maudie and I would quite come to an understanding tonight. May I come tomorrow evening?" "You may come whenever you like," said Regina. "You had better begin, Harry, as you mean to go on. I have no son of my own, and the young men who take my girls away from me must not think they are going to rob me of my daughters. On the contrary, they must make me forget that I never had sons." "I shall be very willing to do that," Harry Marksby returned. "I've always managed to get on with my own mother all right, and I don't see why I shouldn't get on with my mother-in-law. It won't be my fault if I don't." "I'm sure it won't be mine," said Regina. "No, I'm sure it won't," said he heartily. "Well, good night, Mrs. Whittaker." He bent down and kissed her just as frankly as if she had been his own mother, and Regina choked a little as the boy and girl went out of the room together. In a couple of minutes or so Maudie came in with quite a rush for one of her quiet nature, and flung herself down at her mother's feet. "I am so happy, mother dear," she said. "You have been happy in your married life, and you can understand what I feel. Tomorrow will be a great day for me. I'm going to meet Harry in Bond Street at 4 o'clock, and we're going to choose our ring together, and after that I'm going right down to the city with him, and I'm going to have my tea at one of the Bundaby shops. I always did think I should like to keep a shop, mother," she went on. "You have heard me say so lots of times, but I never thought I should one day be at the head of at least 30. End of Twopenny Dinners. Recording by Rosie.
An excerpt from Chapter 4 of Theodore Roosevelt, an Autobiography by Theodore Roosevelt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. An excerpt from Chapter 4 of Theodore Roosevelt, an Autobiography by Theodore Roosevelt. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection, Number 6. In consequence, I never spent more than 2 days on the journey from whatever the point was at which I left the little Missouri, sleeping the one night for as limited a number of hours as possible. As soon as I reached the meeting place, I would find out the wagon to which I was assigned. Riding to it, I turned my horses into the saddle band and reported to the wagon boss, or, in his absence, to the cook, always a privileged character, who was allowed and expected to order men around. He would usually grumble savagely and profanely about my having been put with his wagon, but this was merely conventional on his part. And if I sat down and said nothing, he would probably soon ask me if I wanted anything to eat, to which the correct answer was that I was not hungry and would wait until mealtime. The bedding rolls of the riders would be strewn around the grass, and I would put mine down a little outside the ring, where I would not be in anyone's way, with my 6 or 8 branding irons beside it. The men would ride in, laughing and talking with one another, and perhaps nodding to me. One of their number, usually the wagon foreman, might put some question to me as to what brands I represented, but no other word would be addressed to me, nor would I be expected to volunteer any conversation. Supper would consist of bacon, Dutch oven bread, and possibly beef. Once I won the good graces of my companions at the outset by appearing with 2 antelope which I had shot. After supper I would roll up in my bedding as soon as possible, and the others would follow suit at their pleasure. At 3 in the morning, or thereabouts, at a yell from the cook, all hands would turn hurriedly out. Dressing was a simple affair. Then each man rolled and corded his bedding. If he did not, the cook would leave it behind, and he would go without any for the rest of the trip, and came to the fire, where he picked out a tin cup, tin plate, and knife and fork, helped himself to coffee and to whatever food there was, and ate it standing or squatting as best suited him. Dawn was probably breaking by this time, and the trampling of unshod hoofs showed that the night wrangler was bringing in the pony herd. End of an excerpt from Chapter 4 of Theodore Roosevelt, an Autobiography.
Filboid Studge, The Story of a Mouse That Helped, from the Chronicles of Clovis by Saki. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Lewis Richardson. Filboid Studge, The Story of a Mouse That Helped, by Saki. "I want to marry your daughter," said Moggs Bailey with faltering eagerness. "I'm only an artist, with an income of 200 a year, and she is the daughter of an enormously wealthy man, so I suppose you will think my offer a piece of presumption." Duncan Dullamy, the great company inflator, showed no outward sign of displeasure. As a matter of fact, he was secretly relieved at the prospect of finding even a 200 a year husband for his daughter Leonore. A crisis was rapidly rushing upon him from which he knew he would emerge with neither money nor credit. All his recent ventures had fallen flat, and flattest of all had gone the wonderful new breakfast food, Pipenta, on the advertisement of which he had sunk such huge sums. It could scarcely be called a drug in the market. People bought drugs, but no one bought Pipenta. "Would you marry Leonore if she were a poor man's daughter?" asked the man of phantom wealth. "Yes," said Mark, wisely avoiding the error of over-protestation. And, to his astonishment, Leonore's father not only gave his consent, but suggested a fairly early date for the wedding. "I wish I could show my gratitude in some way," said Mark with genuine emotion. "I'm afraid it's rather like the mouse proposing to help the lion." "Get people to buy that beastly muck," said Dullamy. nodding savagely at a poster of the despised Pipenta.
"And you'll have done more than any of my agents have been able to accomplish."
"It wants a better name," said Mogg reflectively, "and something distinctive in the poster line. Anyway, I'll have a shot at it." 3 weeks later, the world was advised of the coming of a new breakfast food, heralded under the resounding name of Filboid Studge. Spayley put forth no pictures of massive babies springing up with fungus-like rapidity under its forcing influence, or of representatives of the leading nations of the world scrambling with fatuous eagerness for its possession. One huge sombre poster depicted the damned in hell, suffering a new torment from their inability to get at the Filboid Studge which elegant young fiends held in transparent bowls just beyond their reach. The scene was rendered even more gruesome by a subtle suggestion of the features of leading men and women of the day in the portrayal of the lost souls. Prominent individuals of both political parties, society hostesses, well-known dramatic authors and novelists, and distinguished aeroplanists were dimly recognizable in that doomed throng. Noted lights of the musical comedy stage flickered wanly in the shades of the Inferno, smiling still from force of habit, but with the fearsome smiling rage of baffled effort. The poster bore no fulsome allusions to the merits of the new breakfast food, but a single grim statement ran in bold letters along its base. "They cannot buy it now." Spayley had grasped the fact that people will do things from a sense of duty which they would never attempt as a pleasure. There are thousands of respectable middle-class men who, if you found them unexpectedly in a Turkish bath, would explain in all sincerity that a doctor had ordered them to take Turkish baths. If you told them in return that you went there because you liked it, they would stare in pained wonder at the frivolity of your motive. In the same way, whenever a massacre of Armenians is reported from Asia Minor, everyone assumes that it has been carried out under orders from somewhere or another. No one seems to think that there are people who might like to kill their neighbours now and then. And so it was with the new breakfast food. No one would have eaten Filboid Studge as a pleasure, but the grim austerity of its advertisement drove housewives in shoals to the grocers' shops to clamour for an immediate supply. In small kitchens, solemn pigtailed daughters helped depressed mothers to perform the primitive ritual of its preparation. On the breakfast tables of cheerless parlours it was partaken of in silence. Once the womenfolk discovered that it was thoroughly unpalatable, their zeal in forcing it on their households knew no bounds. "You haven't eaten your Filboid Studge!" would be screamed at the appetiteless clerk as he hurried weariedly from the breakfast table, and his evening meal would be prefaced by a warmed-up mess, which would be explained as, "Your Filboid Studge that you didn't eat this morning." Those strange fanatics who ostentatiously mortify themselves, inwardly and outwardly, with health biscuits and health garments, battened aggressively on the new food. Earnest, spectacled young men devoured it on the steps of the National Liberal Club. A bishop who did not believe in a future state preached against the poster, and a peer's daughter died from eating too much of the compound. A further advertisement was obtained when an infantry regiment mutinied and shot its officers rather than eat the nauseous mess. Fortunately, Lord Birrell of Blatherstone, who was War Minister at the moment, saved the situation by his happy epigram that "Discipline, to be effective, must be optional." Filboid Studge had become a household word, but Dullamy wisely realized that it was not necessarily the last word in breakfast dietary. Its supremacy would be challenged as soon as some yet more unpalatable food should be put on the market. There might even be a reaction in favour of something tasty and appetizing, and the Puritan austerity of the moment might be banished from domestic cookery. At an opportune moment, therefore, he sold out his interests in the article which had brought him in colossal wealth at a critical juncture, and placed his financial reputation beyond the reach of cavil. As for Leonore, who was now an heiress on a far greater scale than ever before, he naturally found her something a vast deal higher in the husband market than a 200 a year poster designer. Mark Spayley, the brain mouse who had helped the financial lion with such untoward effect, was left to curse the day he produced the wonder-working poster. "After all," said Clovis, meeting him shortly afterwards at his club, "you have this doubtful consolation. but 'tis not in mortals to countermand success. End of Filboid Studge, The Story of a Mouse That Helped, by Saki. Read by David Lewis Richardson, Lancashire, England.
Robinson Crusoe by Charles Edward Carryl. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Robinson Crusoe by Charles Edward Carryl. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection No. 6. The night was thick and hazy when the Piccadilly Daisy carried down the crew and captain in the sea. And I think the water drowned 'em, for they never, never found 'em, and I know they didn't come ashore with me. Oh, 'twas very sad and lonely when I found myself the only population on this cultivated shore. But I've made a little tavern in a rocky little cavern, and I sit and watch for people at the door. I spent no time in looking for a girl to do my cooking, as I'm quite a clever hand at making stews. But I had that fellow Friday just to keep the tavern tidy, and to put a Sunday polish on my shoes. I have a little garden that I'm cultivating lard in, as the things I eat are rather tough and dry. For I live on toasted lizards, prickly pears, and parrot gizzards, and I'm really very fond of beetle pie. The clothes I had were furry, and it made me fret and worry when I found the moths were eating off the hair. And I had to scrape and sand 'em, and I boiled 'em, and I tanned 'em, till I got the fine morocco suit I wear. I sometimes seek diversion in a family excursion with the few domestic animals you see. And we take along a carrot as refreshments for the parrot, and a little can of jungleberry tea. Then we gather as we travel bits of moss and dirty gravel, and we chip off little specimens of stone, and we carry home as prizes funny bugs of handy sizes, just to give the day a scientific tone. If the roads are wet and muddy, we remain at home and study, for the goat is very clever at a sum. And the dog, instead of fighting, studies ornamental writing, while the cat is taking lessons on the drum. We retire at 11, and we rise again at 7, and I wish to call attention, as I close, to the fact that all the scholars are correct about their collars, and particular in turning out their toes. End of Robinson Crusoe by Charles Edward Carryl.
Ninth Week, excerpted from Summer in a Garden by Charles Dudley Warner. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jason Bennett. Ninth Week, excerpted from Summer in a Garden by Charles Dudley Warner. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection No. 6. I am more and more impressed with the moral qualities of vegetables, and contemplate forming a science which shall rank with comparative anatomy and comparative philology, the science of comparative vegetable morality. We live in an age of protoplasm, and, if life matter is essentially the same in all forms of life, I purpose to begin early, and ascertain the nature of the plants for which I am responsible. I will not associate with any vegetable which is disreputable, or has not some quality that can contribute to my moral growth. I do not care to be seen much with the squashes or the dead beets. Fortunately, I can cut down any sorts I do not like with the hoe, and, probably, commit no more sin in doing so than the Christians did in hewing down the Jews in the Middle Ages. This matter of vegetable rank has not been at all studied as it should be. Why do we respect some vegetables and despise others, when all of them come to an equal honor or ignominy on the table? The bean is a graceful, confiding, engaging vine, but you never can put beans into poetry, nor into the highest sort of prose. There is no dignity in the bean. Corn which in my garden grows alongside the bean, and so far as I can see, with no affectation of superiority, is, however, the child of song. It waves in all literature. But mix it with beans, and its high tone is gone. Succotash is vulgar. It is the bean in it. The bean is a vulgar vegetable, without culture, or any flavor of high society among vegetables. Then there is the cool cucumber, like so many people, good for nothing when it is ripe and the wildness has gone out of it. How inferior in quality it is to the melon, which grows upon a similar vine, is of a like watery consistency, but is not half so valuable. The cucumber is a sort of low comedian in a company where the melon is a minor gentleman. I might also contrast the celery with the potato. The associations are as opposite as the dining room of the Duchess and the cabin of the peasant. I admire the potato, both in vine and blossom, but it is not aristocratic. I began digging my potatoes, by the way, about the 4th of July, and I fancy I have discovered the right way to do it. I treat the potato just as I would a cow. I do not pull them up and shake them out and destroy them, but I dig carefully at the side of the hill, remove the fruit which is grown, leaving the vine undisturbed, and my theory is that it will go on bearing and submitting to my exactions until the frost cuts it down. It is a game that one would not undertake with a vegetable of tone. The lettuce is to me a most interesting study. Lettuce is like conversation. It must be fresh and crisp, so sparkling that you scarcely notice the bitter in it. Lettuce, like most talkers, is, however, apt to run rapidly to seed. Blessed is that sort which comes to a head and so remains, like a few people I know, growing more solid and satisfactory and tender at the same time, and whiter at the center and crisp in their maturity. Lettuce, like conversation, requires a good deal of oil to avoid friction and keep the company smooth. A pinch of Attic salt, a dash of pepper, a quantity of mustard and vinegar, by all means, but so mixed that you will notice no sharp contrasts, and a trifle of sugar. You can put anything, and the more things the better, into salad, as into a conversation, but everything depends upon the skill of mixing. I feel that I am in the best society when I am with lettuce. It is in the select circle of vegetables. The tomato appears well on the table, but you do not want to ask its origin. It is a most agreeable parvenu. Of course, I have said nothing about the berries. They live in another and more ideal region, except perhaps the currant. Here we see that, even among berries, there are degrees of breeding. The currant is well enough, clear as truth, and exquisite in color, but I ask you to notice how far it is from the exclusive hauteur of the aristocratic strawberry and the native refinement of the quietly elegant raspberry. I do not know that chemistry, searching for protoplasm, is able to discover the tendency of vegetables. It can only be found out by outward observation. I confess that I am suspicious of the bean, for instance. There are signs in it of an unregulated life. I put up the most attractive sort of poles for my limas. They stand high and straight like church spires in my theological garden, lifted up, and some of them have even budded, like Aaron's rod. No church steeple in a New England village was ever better fitted to draw to it the rising generation on Sunday than those poles to lift up my beans towards heaven. Some of them did run up the sticks 7 feet and then straggled off into the air in a wanton manner, but more than half of them went gallivanting off to the neighboring grape trellis, and wound their tendrils with the tendrils of the grape, with a disregard of the properties of life, which is a satire upon human nature. And the grape is morally no better. I think the ancients, who were not troubled with the recondite mystery of protoplasm, were right in the mythic union of Bacchus and Venus. Talk about the Darwinian theory of development and the principle of natural selection. I should like to see a garden let to run in accordance with it. If I had left my vegetables and weeds to a free fight, in which the strongest specimens only should come to maturity and the weaker go to the wall, I can clearly see that I should have had a pretty mess of it. It would have been a scene of passion and license and brutality. The pusley would have strangled the strawberry, the upright corn, which has now ears to hear the guilty beating of the hearts of the children who steal the raspberries, would have been dragged to the earth by the wandering bean, the snake-grass would have left no place for the potatoes underground, and the tomatoes would have been swamped by the lusty weeds. With a firm hand I have had to make my own natural selection. Nothing will so well bear watching as a garden, except a family of children next door. Their power of selection beats mine. If they could read half as well as they can steal a while away, I should put up a notice, "Children beware, there is protoplasm here." But I suppose it would have no effect. I believe they would eat protoplasm as quick as anything else, ripe or green. I wonder if this is going to be a cholera year. Considerable cholera is the only thing that would let my apples and pears ripen. Of course, I do not care for the fruit, but I do not want to take the responsibility of letting so much life matter, full of crude and even wicked vegetable human tendencies, pass into the composition of the neighbor's children, some of whom may be as immortal as snake-grass. There ought to be a public meeting about this, and resolutions, and perhaps a clam-bake. At least, it ought to be put into the catechism, and put in strong. End of 9th week. Excerpted from Summer in a Garden, by Charles Dudley Warner.
Witches' Loaves, by O. Henry, from Sixes and Sevens. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bill Mosley. Witches' Loaves, from Sixes and Sevens, by O. Henry. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection, number 6. Miss Martha Meacham kept the little bakery on the corner, the one where you go up 3 steps, and the bell tinkles when you open the door. Miss Martha was 40. Her bank book showed a credit of $2,000, and she possessed 2 false teeth and a sympathetic heart. Many people have married whose chances to do so were much inferior to Miss Martha's. 2 or 3 times a week a customer came in whom she began to take an interest. He was a middle-aged man, wearing spectacles and a brown beard trimmed to a careful point. He spoke English with a strong German accent. His clothes were worn and darned in places, and wrinkled and baggy in others, but he looked neat and had very good manners. He always bought 2 loaves of stale bread. Fresh bread was 5 cents a loaf. Stale ones were 2 for 5. Never did he call for anything but stale bread. Once Miss Martha saw a red and brown stain on his fingers. She was sure then that he was an artist and very poor. No doubt he lived in a garret where he painted pictures and ate stale bread and thought of the good things to eat in Miss Martha's bakery. Often, when Miss Martha sat down to her chops and light rolls and jam and tea, she would sigh and wish that the gentle-mannered artist might share her tasty meal instead of eating his dry crust in that draughty attic. Miss Martha's heart, as you have been told, was a sympathetic one. In order to test her theory as to his occupation, she brought from her room one day a painting that she had bought at a sale, and set it against the shelves behind the bread counter. It was a Venetian scene. A splendid marble palazzo, so it said on the picture, stood in the foreground, or rather for water. For the rest, there were gondolas, with the lady trailing her hand in the water, clouds, sky, and chiaro oscuro in plenty. No artist could fail to notice it. 2 days afterward the customer came in. "2 loaves of stale bread, if you please." "You have here a fine picture, madam," he said, while she was wrapping up the bread. "Yes," says Miss Martha, reveling in her own cunning. "I do so admire art, and—" No, it would not do to say artists thus early. "And paintings," she substituted. "You think it is a good picture?" "Der balance," said the customer, "is not in good drawing. Der perspective of it is not true. Good morning, madam." He took his bread, bowed, and hurried out. Yes, he must be an artist. Miss Martha took the picture back to her room. How gentle and kindly his eyes shone behind his spectacles. What a broad brow he had. To be able to judge perspective at a glance, and to live on stale bread. But genius often has to struggle before it is recognized. What a thing it would be for art and perspective if genius were backed by $2,000 in bank, a bakery, and a sympathetic heart to— But these were daydreams, Miss Martha. Often now when he came, he would chat for a while across the showcase. He seemed to crave Miss Martha's cheerful words. He kept on buying stale bread. Never a cake, never a pie, never one of her delicious Sally Lunns. She thought he began to look thinner and discouraged. Her heart ached to add something good to eat to his meager purchase, but her courage failed at the act. She did not dare affront him. She knew the pride of artists. Miss Martha took to wearing her blue-dotted silk waist behind the counter. In the back room she cooked a mysterious compound of quince seeds and borax. Ever so many people use it for the complexion. One day the customer came in as usual, laid his nickel on the showcase, and called for his stale loaves. While Miss Martha was reaching for them, there was a great tooting and clanging, and a fire engine came lumbering past. The customer hurried to the door to look, as any one will. Suddenly inspired, Miss Martha seized the opportunity. On the bottom shelf, behind the counter, was a pound of fresh butter that the dairyman had left 10 minutes before. With a bread knife, Miss Martha made a deep slash in each of the stale loaves, inserted a generous quantity of butter, and pressed the loaves tight again. When the customer turned once more, she was tying the paper around them. When he had gone, after an unusually pleasant little chat, Miss Martha smiled to herself, but not without a slight fluttering of the heart. Had she been too bold? Would he take offense? But surely not. There was no language of edibles. Butter was no emblem of unmaidenly forwardness. For a long time that day her mind dwelt on the subject. She imagined the scene when he should discover her little deception. He would lay down his brushes and palette. There would stand his easel, with the picture he was painting, in which the perspective was beyond criticism. He would prepare for his luncheon of dry bread and water. He would slice into the loaf. Ah! Miss Martha blushed. Would he think of the hand that placed it there as he ate? Would he— The front door jangled viciously. Someone was coming in, making a great deal of noise. Miss Martha hurried to the front. Two men were there. One was a young man smoking a pipe, a man she had never seen before. The other was her artist. His face was very red. His hat was on the back of his head. His hair was wildly rumpled. He clenched his two fists and shook them ferociously at Miss Martha. At Miss Martha! Dumkopf! He shouted with extreme loudness, and then Tausendonfer, or something like it in German. The young man tried to draw him away. I will not go, he said angrily, else I shall told her. He made a bass drum of Miss Martha's counter. You have spoilt me, he cried, his blue eyes blazing behind his spectacles. I will tell you, you was one meddlingsome old cat. Miss Martha leaned weakly against the shelves and laid one hand on her blue-dotted silk waist. The young man took the other by the collar. Come on, he said. You've said enough. He dragged the angry one out at the door to the sidewalk and then came back. Guess you ought to be told, ma'am, he said, what the row is about. That's Blumberger. He's an architectural draftsman. I work in the same office with him. He's been working hard for 3 months, drawing a plan for a new city hall. It was a prize competition. He finished inking the lines yesterday. You know, a draftsman always makes his drawing in pencil first. When it's done, he rubs out the pencil lines with handfuls of stale breadcrumbs. That's better than India rubber. Blumberger's been buying the bread here. Well, today... Well, you know, ma'am, that butter isn't... Well, Blumberger's plan isn't good for anything now except to cut up into railroad sandwiches. Miss Martha went into the back room. She took off the blue-dotted silk waist and put on the old brown serge she used to wear. Then she poured the quince-seed and borax mixture out of the window into the ash can. End of Witches' Loaves. Recording by Bill Mosley, Frellsburg, Texas, USA.
Foods That Will Win the War and How to Cook Them by C. Houston Goodis and Alberta M. Goodis. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Paul Currington. Foods That Will Win the War and How to Cook Them by C. Houston Goodis and Alberta M. Goodis. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection, number 6. This is what God gives us. What are you giving so that others may live? Eat less wheat, meat, fats, sugar. Send more to Europe, or they will starve. Forward. Food will win the war, and the nation whose food resources are best conserved will be the victor. This is the truth that our government is trying to drive home to every man, woman, and child in America. We have always been happy in the fact that ours was the richest nation in the world, possessing unlimited supplies of food, fuel, energy, and ability. But rich as these resources are, they will not meet the present food shortage unless every family and every individual enthusiastically cooperates in the National Saving Campaign as outlined by the United States Food Administration. The regulations prescribed for this saving campaign are simple and easy of application. Our government does not ask us to give up 3 square meals a day, nor even 1. All it asks is that we substitute as far as possible corn and other cereals for wheat, reduce a little our meat consumption, and save sugar and fats by careful utilization of these products. There are few housekeepers who are not eager to help in this saving campaign, and there are few indeed who do not feel the need of conserving family resources. But just how is sometimes a difficult task. This book is planned to solve the housekeeper's problem. It shows how to substitute cereals and other grains for wheat, how to cut down the meat bill by the use of meat extension and meat substitute dishes which supply equivalent nutrition at much less cost. It shows the use of syrup and other products that save sugar, and it explains how to utilize all kinds of fats. It contains 47 recipes for the making of war breads, 64 recipes on low-cost meat dishes and meat substitutes, 54 recipes for sugarless desserts, menus for meatless and wheatless days, methods of purchasing, in all some 200 ways of meeting present food conditions at minimum cost and without the sacrifice of nutrition. Not only have its authors planned to help the woman in the home conserve the family income, but to encourage those saving habits which must be acquired by this nation if we are to secure a permanent peace that will ensure the world against another onslaught by the Prussian military powers. A little bit of saving in food means a tremendous aggregate total when 100 million people are doing the saving. One wheatless meal a day would not mean hardship. There are always corn and other products to be used. Yet one wheatless meal a day in every family would mean a saving of 90 million bushels of wheat, which totals 5.4 billion pounds. 2 meatless days a week would mean a saving of 2.2 million pounds of meat per annum. 1 teaspoonful of sugar per person saved each day would ensure a supply ample to take care of our soldiers and our allies. These quantities mean but a small individual sacrifice, but when multiplied by our vast population, they will immeasurably aid and encourage the men who are giving their lives to the noble cause of humanity on which our nation has embarked. Foods That Will Win the War and How to Cook Them by C. Houston Goodis and Alberta M. Goodis. Read by Paul Currington.
Food for Your Children by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. Food Administration. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Food for Your Children. Give your children their chance. They ought to have it, and you want to give it to them. They must have the right food. Think how fast the child grows. The new muscles and bones and all the other parts of the body are made from the food which the child eats. Give him clean, wholesome, simply cooked food, plenty of milk, cereals, vegetables, fruit, an egg or some meat occasionally. Wrong food, too little, too much, or wrong kinds, hurts the child's chance of being the strong, healthy boy or girl you want. Right food may mean strong bodies, good brains, rosy cheeks, bright eyes. Help your child to grow big and strong. Here's good food for a real youngster's day. A good breakfast to start him off. Milk, cornmeal mush, apple sauce. It makes him fit for school and fit for play. Milk, and plenty of it, makes him grow, a quart each day if you can. Put it on his cereal and in his cup. Make it into soups, puddings, or custards for him. Try the recipes on the last page and watch him smile. Whole milk is best, of course, but skim milk is good if there is a little butter in his meals. Cottage cheese is good, too. No coffee or tea, not even a taste. Leave them for the grown-ups. Milk, cocoa, not too strong, and fruit juices are the drinks for children, and plenty of water always. Fruit they enjoy, and they need it too. Baked apples, apple sauce, thoroughly ripe bananas, prunes, oranges, etc. Give them vegetables, fresh or canned. Plenty of fruits and vegetables tend to prevent constipation. Use proper food and do not depend upon laxatives. The youngster can't be well unless the bowels move regularly. Don't let him hurry off in the morning without attending to this duty. Other foods a child needs: whole wheat bread, not too fresh, corn bread, well-cooked oatmeal, cornmeal, rice. They help make strong boys and girls. Some fats, butter or margarine or meat fats on his bread or in gravies. An egg perhaps, particularly if he doesn't get his full quart of milk, or he can have a little meat or fish, but he does not need much. Sweets are good for them, the right ones at the right time. Dates, raisins, stewed fruits, simple puddings, sugar cookies, are better than candy. Give them at meal times. Between meals let them have bread and butter, a cracker, or fruit. They won't spoil the appetite, and candy will. Plan meals like these. Here are 2 sets of the right kind for your youngster. Grown people will like them too. If sometimes these seem too much work, bread and milk alone will make a good meal. Breakfast. No. 1. Apple sauce, oatmeal with milk, milk to drink. No. 2. Stewed prunes, cocoa, weak. Toast and butter. Dinner. No. 1. Stew with carrots, potatoes, and a little meat. Whole wheat bread. Creamy rice pudding. Milk to drink. No. 2. Fish with white sauce, spinach or any greens. Cornbread. Milk to drink. Supper. No. 1. Cream of bean soup, crackers and jam, milk. No. 2. Baked potato, apple betty, milk. Your child must have the best of foods. Good dishes for children. These dishes are good for children and grown-ups too. The recipes provide enough for a family of 5. Milk vegetable soups. 1 quart milk, skim milk may be used. 2½ tablespoons flour. 2 tablespoons butter or margarine or other fat. 1 teaspoon salt. 2 cups thoroughly cooked vegetable, finely chopped, mashed, or put through a sieve. Spinach, peas, beans, potatoes, celery, or asparagus make good soups. Stir flour into melted fat and mix with the cold milk. Add the cooked vegetable and stir over the fire until thickened. If soup is too thick, add a little water or milk. Rice pudding. 1 quart milk, 1/3 cup rice, 1/3 cup sugar, 1/2 cup raisins or chopped dates, 1/2 teaspoon salt, 1/8 teaspoon ground nutmeg or cinnamon. Wash the rice, mix all together, and bake 3 hours in a very slow oven, stirring now and then at first. This may be made on top of the stove in a double boiler or in a fireless cooker. Any coarse cereal may be used in place of rice. For more suggestions, send to the U.S. Department of Agriculture for Farmer's Bulletin 717, Food for Young Children. It tells more about feeding children and the reasons why right food is so important. It shows every mother how to give her children their chance in life. End of Food for Your Children by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Recording by TriciaG.
The Eating Houses by George C. Foster, from New York in Slices. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Eating Houses by George C. Foster. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection Number 6. Beef steak and tater vegetable number 20. Injun hard and sparrowgrass number 16. Waiter, waiter, waiter. Coming, sir, while the rascal's going as fast as he can. Is that beef killed for my porterhouse steak I ordered last week? Ready in a minute, sir. Coming, sir. Directly, sir. 2 and 6pence, biled a man cabbage, shillin'. Rice puddin', 6pence, 18pence. At the bar, if you please. Lobster sauce, salmon, number 4. Yes, sir. Imagine a continuous stream of such sounds as these, about the size of the Croton River, flowing through the banks of clattering plates and clashing knives and forks, perfumed with the steam from a mammoth kitchen, roasting, boiling, baking, frying beneath the floor. Crowds of animals with a pair of jaws apiece wagging in emulation of the one wielded with such terrific effect by Samson, and the thermometer, which has become ashamed of itself and hides away behind a mountain of hats in the corner, melting up by degrees to boiling heat, and you will have some notion of a New York eating-house. We once undertook to count these establishments in the lower part of the city, but got surfeited on the smell of fried grease before we got half through the first street and were obliged to go home in a cab. We believe, however, that there can't be less than 100 of them within half a mile of the Exchange. They are too important a slice of New York to be overlooked, and strangers who stop curiosity hunting after they have climbed the big clock case at the head of Wall Street haven't seen half the sights. A New York eating-house at high tide is a scene which would well repay the labors of an antiquarian or a panoramist, if its spirit and details could be but half preserved. Everything is done differently in New York from anywhere else, but in eating the difference is more striking than in any other branch of human economy. A thoroughbred diner downtown will look at a bill of fare, order his dinner, bolted and himself, and be engaged in putting off a lot of goods upon a greenhorn while you are getting your napkin fixed over your nankins, we think the cotton article preferable, and deciding whether you will take oxtail or mock turtle. A regular downtowner surveys the kitchen with his nose as he comes upstairs, selects his dish by intuition, and swallows it by steam and the electro-galvanic battery. As to digesting it, that is none of his business. He has paid all liabilities to his stomach, and that is all he knows or cares about the matter. The stomach must manage its own affairs. He is not in that line. Not less than 30,000 persons engaged in mercantile or financial affairs dine at eating-houses every day. The work commences punctually at 12, and from that hour until 3 or 4 the havoc is immense and incessant. Taylor at Buena Vista was nothing to it. They sweep up everything. Not a fragment is left. The fare is generally bad enough, not nearly equal to that which the cook at the home above Bleecker saves for the beggars, generally her own 13 cousins just come over. It is really wonderful how men of refined tastes and pampered habits, who at home are as fastidious as luxury and a delicate appetite can make them, find it in their hearts or stomachs either to gorge such disgusting masses of stringy meat and tepid vegetables, and to go about their business again under the fond delusion that they have dined. But custom, they say, does wonders, and it seems that the fear of losing it makes our merchant princes willing to put up with and put down warm swill in lieu of soup, perspiring joints for delicate entrees, and cornmeal and molasses instead of meringue à la crème à la rose. There are 3 distinct classes of eating-houses, and each has its model or type. Linnaeus would probably classify them as Sweeneyorum, Brownivorous, and Delmonican. The Sweeneyorum is but an extension downward of the Brownivorous, which we have already described. The chief difference to be noted between the two is that while at Brown's the waiters actually do pass by you within hail now and then, at Sweeney's no such phenomenon ever by any possibility occurs. The room is laid out like the floor of a church, with tables and benches for 4 in place of pews. Along the aisles, of grease if you judge by the smell, are ranged at stated intervals the attentive waiters, who receive the dishes, small plate 6d, large plate shillin', as they are cut off by the man at the helm, and distribute them on either side with surprising dexterity and precision. Sometimes a nice bit of rose goose, tender, may be seen flying down the aisle without its original wings, followed closely in playful sport by a small plate bile beef vegetables, until both arrive at their destination. When Goose leaps lightly in front of a poet of the Sunday press, who ordered it probably through a commendable preference for a brother of the quill, while the fat and lazy beef dumps itself down with perfect resignation before the monstrous jaws of one of the boys, who has just come from a fire in 49th Street and is hungry some. At Brown's we get a bill of fare with the extras all honestly marked off and priced at the margin. But at Sweeney's we save our sixpence and dispense with superfluities. The bill of fare is delivered by a man at the door, regularly engaged for that purpose, and is as follows. Biled lamb capersores, roast beef, roast goose, roast mutton and taters. Biled man cabbage, vegetables. Walk in, sir. Take a seat, sir. This is certainly clear and distinct as General Taylor's political opinions, and does away with a great deal of lying in print to which bills of fare as well as newspapers are too much addicted. The Sweeney, or sixpenny cut, is frequented by a more diversified set of customers than either of the others. It is not impossible to see here Professor Bush dining cheek by jowl with a hodman off duty, nor to find a blackleg from Park Row seated opposite the police officer whose manifest destiny it will be one of these days to take him to quad unless he should happen to have money enough about him to pay for being let go. The editor, the author, the young lawyer, the publisher, the ice cream man round the corner, the poor physician on his way to patients who don't pay, the young student of divinity learning humility at 6 shillings a week, the journeyman printer on a batter and afraid to go home to his wife before he gets sober. In short, all classes who go to make up the great middle stripe of population concentrate and commingle at Sweeney's. Yet all these varied elements never effervesce into anything in the slightest degree resembling a disturbance, for eating is a serious business, especially when you have but sixpence and no idea whether the next one has been coined. It is true that Sweeney's is emphatically a sixpenny eating house, but you must take care what you are about, or you may as well have dined at the Astor. Unless you know how it is done, you will be nicely done yourself. If you indulge in a second piece of bread, a pickle, a bit of cheese, etc., etc., your bill will be summed up to you something after this fashion. Clam soup, 6 pence, roast beef large, shillin', roast chicken, 18, extra bread 3, butter 6 pence, pickle 6 pence, puddin' 6 pence, cheese 3, claret, logwood, and water alumized 2 shillin', 7 shillin'. If you wish to dine cheaply, be contented with a cheap dinner. Call simply for a small plate of roast beef mixed. This means mashed turnips and potatoes in equal quantities. After you have eaten this frugal dish, and it is as much as anyone really needs for dinner, you may send for bread hard, drink a tumbler of cool Croton, pay 1 shilling for the whole, and go about your business like a refreshed and sensible man. There is still another class of eating houses which deserve honorable mention, the cake and coffee shops, of which Buttercake Dick's is a favorite sample. The chief merit of these establishments is that they are kept open all night, and that hungry editors or belated idlers can get a plate of biscuits with a lump of butter in the belly for 3 cents, and a cup of coffee for as much more. Or he can regale himself on pumpkin pie at 4 cents the quarter section, with a cup of Croton fresh from the hydrant gratis. The principal supporters of these luxurious establishments, however, are the firemen and the upper circles of the newsboys, who have made good business during the day or have succeeded in pummeling some smaller boy and taking his pennies from him. Here, ranged on wooden benches, the butter cakes and coffee spread ostentatiously before them, and their intelligent faces supported in the crotch of their joined hands, these autocrats of the press and the boys discuss the grave questions as to whether 14 was at the fire in Front Street first or whether it is all gas. Here also are decided in advance the relative merits and speed of the boats entered for the next regatta, and points of great pith and moment in the science of the ring are definitively settled. As midnight comes and passes, the firemen, those children of the dark, gather from unimaginable places, and soon a panorama of red shirts and brown faces lines the walls and fills the whole area of the little cellar. They are generally far more moderate than politicians and less noisy than gentlemen. At the first tingle of the fire bell, they leap like crouching greyhounds, and are in an instant darting through the street towards their respective engine-houses, whence they emerge dragging their ponderous machines behind them, ready to work like Titans all night and all day, exposing themselves to every peril of life and limb, and performing incredible feats of daring strength to save the property of people who know nothing about them, care nothing for them, and perhaps will scarcely take the trouble to thank them. But of all this by itself, the type of eating-house of which we have not spoken is the expensive and aristocratic restaurant, of which Delmonico's is the only complete specimen in the United States. And this, we have it on the authority of travelled epicures, is equal in every respect in its appointments and attendance, as well as the quality and execution of its dishes, to any similar establishment in Paris itself. We have not left ourselves room in this number to speak in detail of this famous restaurant, nor of its habitués. It well deserves, however, a separate notice, and a look through its well-filled yet not crowded saloons, and into its admirable cuisine will enable us to pass an hour very profitably, besides obtaining a dinner which, as a work of art, ranks with a picture by Huntington, a poem by Willis, or a statue by Powers. A dinner which is not merely a quantity of food deposited in the stomach, but is in every sense and to all the senses a great work of art. End of The Eating Houses by George G. Foster.
Feeding the Mind by Lewis Carroll. Read without the prefatory note by William H. Draper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Carol Box. Feeding the Mind by Lewis Carroll. Breakfast, dinner, tea. In extreme cases, breakfast, luncheon, dinner, tea, supper, and a glass of something hot at bedtime. What care we take about feeding the lucky body. Which of us does as much for his mind? And what causes the difference? Is the body so much the more important of the two? By no means. But life depends on the body being fed, whereas we can continue to exist as animals, scarcely as men, though the mind be utterly starved and neglected. Therefore nature provides that in case of serious neglect of the body, such terrible consequences of discomfort and pain shall ensue, as will soon bring us back to a sense of our duty, and some of the functions necessary to life she does for us altogether, leaving us no choice in the matter. It would fare but ill with many of us if we were left to superintend our own digestion and circulation. "Bless me," one would cry, "I forgot to wind up my heart this morning. To think that it has been standing still for the last 3 hours." "I can't walk with you this afternoon," a friend would say, as I have no less than 11 dinners to digest. I had to let them stand over from last week, being so busy, and my doctor says he will not answer for the consequences if I wait any longer. Well it is, I say, for us, that the consequences of neglecting the body can be clearly seen and felt, and it might be well for some if the mind were equally visible and tangible, if we could take it, say, to the doctor and have its pulse felt.
Why, what have you been doing with this mind lately? How have you fed it? It looks pale and the pulse is very slow.
Well, doctor, it has not had much regular food lately. I gave it a lot of sugar plums yesterday.
Sugar plums? What kind?
Well, they were a parcel of conundrums, sir.
Ah, I thought so. Now just mind this, if you go on playing tricks like that, you'll spoil all its teeth, and get laid up with mental indigestion. You must have nothing but the plainest reading for the next few days. Take care now, no novels on any account.
Considering the amount of painful experience many of us have had in feeding and dosing the body, it would, I think, be quite worth our while to try and translate some of the rules into corresponding ones for the mind. First, then, we should set ourselves to provide for our mind its proper kind of food. We very soon learn what will and what will not agree with the body, and find little difficulty in refusing a piece of the tempting pudding or pie which is associated in our memory with that terrible attack of indigestion, and whose very name irresistibly recalls rhubarb and magnesia. But it takes a great many lessons to convince us how indigestible some of our favourite lines of reading are, and again we make a meal of the unwholesome novel, sure to be followed by its usual train of low spirits, unwillingness to work, weariness of existence, in fact, by mental nightmare. Then we should be careful to provide this wholesome food in proper amount. Mental gluttony or over-reading is a dangerous propensity, tending to weakness of digestive power, and in some cases to loss of appetite. We know that bread is a good and wholesome food, but who would like to try the experiment of eating 2 or 3 loaves at a sitting? I have heard a physician telling his patient, whose complaint was merely gluttony and want of exercise, that the earliest symptom of hypernutrition is a deposition of adipose tissue, and no doubt the fine long words greatly consoled the poor man under his increasing load of fat. I wonder if there is such a thing in nature as a fat mind. I really think I have met with 1 or 2 minds which could not keep up with the slowest trot in conversation, could not jump over a logical fence to save their lives, always got stuck fast in a narrow argument, and in short were fit for nothing but to waddle helplessly through the world. Then again, though the food be wholesome and in proper amount, we know that we must not consume too many kinds at once. Take the thirsty a quart of beer, or a quart of cider, or even a quart of cold tea, and he will probably thank you, though not so heartily in the last case. But what think you his feelings would be if you offered him a tray containing a little mug of beer, a little mug of cider, another of cold tea, 1 of hot tea, 1 of coffee, 1 of cocoa, and corresponding vessels of milk, water, brandy and water, and buttermilk? The sum total might be a quart, but would it be the same thing to the haymaker? Having settled the proper kind, amount, and variety of our mental food, it remains that we should be careful to allow proper intervals between meal and meal, and not swallow the food hastily without mastication, so that it may be thoroughly digested, both which rules for the body are also applicable at once to the mind. First, as to the intervals, these are as really necessary as they are for the body, with this difference only, that while the body requires 3 or 4 hours rest before it is ready for another meal, the mind will, in many cases, do with 3 or 4 minutes. I believe that the interval required is much shorter than is generally supposed, and from personal experience, I would recommend anyone who has to devote several hours together to one subject of thought to try the effect of such a break, say once an hour, leaving off for 5 minutes only each time, but taking care to throw the mind absolutely out of gear for those 5 minutes, and to turn it entirely to other subjects. It is astonishing what an amount of impetus and elasticity the mind recovers during those short periods of rest. And then, as to the mastication of the food, the mental process answering to this is simply thinking over what we read, This is a very much greater exertion of mind than the mere passive taking in the contents of our author. So much greater an exertion is it, that, as Coleridge says, the mind often angrily refuses to put itself to such trouble. So much greater that we are far too apt to neglect it altogether, and go on pouring in fresh food on the top of the undigested masses already lying there, till the unfortunate mind is fairly swamped under the flood. But the greater the exertion, the more valuable, we may be sure, is the effect. 1 hour of steady thinking over a subject, a solitary walk is as good an opportunity for the process as any other, is worth 2 or 3 of reading only. And just consider another effect of this thorough digestion of the books we read. I mean the arranging and ticketing, so to speak, of the subjects in our minds, so that we can readily refer to them when we want them. Sam Slick tells us that he has learnt several languages in his life, but somehow couldn't keep the parcels sorted in his mind. And many a mind that hurries through book after book, without waiting to digest or arrange anything, gets into that sort of condition, and the unfortunate owner finds himself far from fit really to support the character all his friends give him. A thoroughly well-read man, just you try him in any subject now. You can't puzzle him. You turn to the thoroughly well-read man. You ask him a question, say, in English history. He is understood to have finished reading Macaulay. He smiles good-naturedly, tries to look as if he knew all about it, and proceeds to dive into his mind for the answer. Up comes a handful of very promising facts, but on examination they turn out to belong to the wrong century and are pitched in again. A second haul brings up a fact much more like the real thing, but unfortunately along with it comes a tangle of other things, a fact in political economy, a rule in arithmetic, the ages of his brother's children, and a stanza of Gray's elegy, and among all these the fact he wants has got hopelessly twisted up and entangled. Meanwhile everyone is waiting for his reply, and as the silence is getting more and more awkward, our well-read friend has to stammer out some half-answer at last, not nearly so clear or so satisfactory as an ordinary schoolboy would have given, and all this for want of making up his knowledge into proper bundles and ticketing them. Do you know the unfortunate victim of ill-judged mental feeding when you see him? Can you doubt him? Look at him drearily wandering round a reading-room, tasting dish after dish, we beg his pardon, book after book, keeping to none. First a mouthful of novel, but no, he has had nothing but that to eat for the last week, and is quite tired of the taste. Then a slice of science, but you know at once what the result of that will be. Of course, much too tough for his teeth, and so on through the whole weary round, which he tried and failed in yesterday, and will probably try and fail in tomorrow. Mr. Oliver Wendell Holmes, in his very amusing book The Professor at the Breakfast Table, gives the following rule for knowing whether a human being is young or old. The crucial experiment is this: offer a bulky bun to the suspected individual just 10 minutes before dinner. If this is easily accepted and devoured, the fact of youth is established. He tells us that a human being, if young, will eat anything at any hour of the day or night. To ascertain the healthiness of the mental appetite of a human animal, place in its hands a short, well-written but not exciting treatise on some popular subject, a mental bun, in fact. If it is read with eager interest and perfect attention, and if the reader can answer questions on the subject afterwards, the mind is in first-rate working order. If it be politely laid down again, or perhaps lounged over for a few minutes, and then, "I can't read this stupid book. Would you hand me the second volume of The Mysterious Murder?" you may be equally sure that there is something wrong in the mental digestion. If this paper has given you any useful hints on the important subject of reading, and made you see that it is one's duty no less than one's interest, to read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest the good books that fall in your way, its purpose has been fulfilled. End of Feeding the Mind by Lewis Carroll. Recording by Carryl Box in Surrey, England, on the 23rd of June, 2011.
A Dissertation on Roast Pig by Charles Lamb. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read for you by Chiquito Crasto. A Dissertation on Roast Pig by Charles Lamb. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection, Number 6. Mankind, says a Chinese manuscript which my friend M. was obliging enough to read and explain to me, for the first 70,000 ages ate their meat raw, clawing it or biting it from the living animal, just as they do in Abyssinia to this day. This period is not obscurely hinted at by their great Confucius. Footnote: Confucius, a celebrated Chinese philosopher born about 550 BC. In the second chapter of his Mundane Mutations, where he designates a kind of golden age by the term Chofeng, literally the cook's holiday. The manuscript goes on to say that the art of roasting, or rather broiling, which I take to be the elder brother, was accidentally discovered in the manner following. The swineherd Hoti, having gone out into the woods one morning, as his manner was, to collect mast, footnote, mast acorns, nuts, for his hogs, left his cottage in the care of his eldest son Bobo, a great lubberly boy, who being fond of playing with fire, as yonkers, footnote, yonkers, youngsters, of his age commonly are, let some sparks escape into a bundle of straw, which kindling quickly spread the conflagration over every part of their poor mansion, till it was reduced to ashes. Together with the cottage, a sorry antediluvian makeshift of a building, you may think it, what was of much more importance, a fine litter of young pigs, no less than 9 in number, perished. China pigs, footnote, China pigs, what adjective would we use now? Have been esteemed a luxury all over the East from the remotest periods that we read of. Bobo was in the utmost consternation, as you may think, not so much for the sake of the tenement, which his father and he could easily build up again with a few dry branches, and the labour of an hour or two, at any time, as for the loss of the pigs. While he was thinking what he should say to his father, and wringing his hands over the smoking remnants of one of those untimely sufferers, an odour assailed his nostrils, unlike any scent which he had before experienced. What could it proceed from? Not from the burnt cottage. He had smelled that smell before. Indeed, this was by no means the first accident of the kind which had occurred through the negligence of this unlucky young firebrand. Much less did it resemble that of any known herb, weed, or flower. A premonitory moistening at the same time overflowed his nether lip. He knew not what to think. He next stooped down to feel the pig, if there were any signs of life in it. He burned his fingers, and to cool them he applied them in his booby fashion to his mouth. Some of the crumbs of the scorched skin had come away with his fingers, and for the first time in his life, in the world's life indeed, for before him no man had known it, he tasted crackling. Footnote, crackling, the brown crisp rind of roasted pork. Again he felt and fumbled at the pig. It did not burn him so much now. Still he licked his fingers from a sort of habit. The truth at length broke into his slow understanding, that it was the pig that smelled so, and the pig that tasted so delicious, and surrendering himself to the newborn pleasure, he fell to tearing whole handfuls of the scorched skin with the flesh next it, and was cramming it down his throat in his beastly fashion, when his sire entered amid the smoking rafters, armed with the retributory cudgel, and finding how affairs stood, began to rain blows upon the young rogue's shoulders as thick as hailstones, which Bobo heeded not any more than if they had been flies. The tickling pleasure which he experienced in his lower regions had rendered him quite callous to any of the inconveniences he might feel in those remote quarters. His father might lay on, but he could not beat him from his pig, till he had fairly made an end of it, when, becoming a little more sensible of his situation, something like the following dialogue ensued. "You graceless fellow, what have you got there devouring? Is it not enough that you have burned down 3 houses with your dog's tricks? But you must be eating fire, and I know not what. What have you got there, I say?" "Oh, father, the pig, the pig! Do come and taste how nice the burnt pig eats." The ears of Hoti tingled with horror. He cursed his son, and he cursed himself that ever he should have a son that should eat burnt pig. Bobo, whose scent was wonderfully sharpened since morning, soon raked out another pig, and fairly rending it asunder, thrust the lesser half by main force into the fists of Hoti, still shouting out, "Eat, eat, eat the burnt pig, father, only taste," with such like ejaculations, cramming all the while as if he would choke. Hoti trembled in every joint while he grasped the abominable thing, wavering whether he should not put his son to death for an unnatural young monster, when the crackling scorching his fingers as it had done his son's, and applying the same remedy to them, he in his turn tasted some of its flavour, which, make what sour mouths he would for a pretence, proved not altogether displeasing to him. In conclusion, for the manuscript here is a little tedious, both father and son fairly sat down to the mess, and never left off till they dispatched all that remained of the litter. Bobo was strictly enjoined not to let the secret escape, for the neighbours would certainly have stoned them for a couple of abominable wretches, who could think of improving upon the good meat God had sent them. Nevertheless, strange stories got about. It was observed that Hotti's cottage was burned down more frequently than ever. Nothing but fires from this time forward. Some would break out in broad day, others in the night time. And Hotti himself, which was the more remarkable, instead of chastising his son, seemed to grow more indulgent to him than ever. At length they were watched, terrible mystery discovered, and father and son summoned to take their trial at Pekin, then an inconsiderable assize town. Footnote: Assize town, the place where the court sits to conduct trials. Evidence was given, the obnoxious food itself produced in court, and verdict about to be pronounced, when the foreman of the jury begged that some of the burnt pig of which the culprit stood accused might be handed into the box. He handled it, and they all handled it, and burning their fingers, as Bobo and his father had done before them, and nature prompting to each of them the same remedy, against the face of all the facts, and the clearest charge which the judge had ever given, to the surprise of the whole court, townsfolk, strangers, reporters, and all present, without leaving the box, or any manner of consultation whatever, they brought in a simultaneous verdict of not guilty. The judge, who was a shrewd fellow, winked at the manifest iniquity of the decision, and when the court was dismissed, went privily and bought up all the pigs that could be had for love or money. In a few days his lordship's town-house was now observed to be on fire. The thing took wing, and now there was nothing to be seen but fires in every direction. Fuel and pigs grew enormously dear all over the district. The insurance offices one and all shut up shop. People built slighter and slighter every day, until it was feared that the very science of architecture would in no long time be lost to the world. Thus this custom of firing houses continued, till in process of time, says my manuscript, a sage arose, like our Locke, footnote, Locke, John Locke, a celebrated English philosopher of the 17th century, who made a discovery that flesh of swine, or indeed of any other animal, might be cooked, burnt as they called it, without the necessity of consuming a whole house to dress it. Then first began the rude form of a gridiron. Roasting by the string or spit came in a century or two later, I forget in whose dynasty. By such slow degrees, concludes the manuscript, do the most useful and seemingly the most obvious arts make their way among mankind. End of A Dissertation on Roast Pig by Charles Lamb. Read for you by Chiquito Crasto, Birmingham, Alabama.
The Mouse and the Christmas Cake by Anonymous. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Mouse and the Christmas Cake by Anonymous. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection No. 6. A little mouse that built itself a house in a Christmas cake. A pretty story I will tell of Nib, a little mouse who took delight, when none were near, to skip about the house. Her little nose could sniff and smell where all good things were kept, and in the pantry well she knew that Mistress Pussy slept. But notwithstanding in she crept, and on the shelf she found a Christmas cake, the top of which was by a castle crowned. The subject of the present cake was Windsor's mighty walls, with turrets, windows, standard too, and entrance to the halls. Why, here within such walls as these, thought Mousie, I could dwell, and should the cat lay siege to them, defend myself right well. So with her little teeth, which served for pickaxe and for spade, she gnawed right through the Gothic door, and thus an entrance made. Then climbed the turret, which she chose her residence to make, and thought to leave it now and then, and feast upon the cake. All this occurred on Christmas Eve, and next came Christmas Day, and then some little folks arrived to eat and drink and play. Right merry are the little folks, and what a noise they make when Windsor Castle they behold displayed upon the cake. The turrets and the walls they view, the cannon too admire, the soldiers ready to present, and then pop,
pop, to fire. On this, when they had long enough all exercised their wit, they scrutinized the cake, and wished to taste a bit of it. Each guest prepared, the knife was raised, some slices to begin, when lo, with wonder all exclaimed, I hear a noise within. Poor Mousie, when she saw the knife, at once expressed her fear, by squeaking out with all her might, which every one could hear. Then John, as he the turret viewed, with consternation cried, There's something, I am sure, alive, and moving too, inside. All now were hushed, and knew not what all this could be about, while Mouse in fright forgot her tail, which at the top popped out. Why, here's some trick, the lady cried, I'll knock the turret down. Mousie in terror gave a leap, and ran along her gown. Oh! screamed the lady, what is this? On each side was dismay, which Mousie took advantage of by scampering away. Their fright all o'er, loud laughs ensued from all within the house, to think that so much fear should be caused by a little mouse. The children hunted for this mouse, but she was not a dolt to wait till she was caught, but made right through a hole a bolt. The party then began their dance, and singing next ensued, and then came supper with its cakes, and very best home brewed. End of The Mouse and the Christmas Cake, by Anonymous. Read by Rhonda Fetterman.
The Women's Petition Against Coffee, by Anonymous. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rosie. The Women's Petition Against Coffee, by Anonymous. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection Number 6. The Women's Petition Against Coffee, representing to public consideration the grand inconveniences accruing to their sex from the excessive use of that drying and feebling liquor. Presented to the Right Honourable the Keepers of the Liberty of Venus, by A. Well Willer. London, printed 1674. To the Right Honourable the Keepers of the Liberties of Venus, the Worshipful Court of Female Assistants, etc., the humble petitions and address of several thousands of buxom good women languishing in extremity of want, showeth that since 'tis reckoned amongst the glories of our native country to be a paradise for women, the fame in our apprehensions can consist in nothing more than the brisk activity of our men, who in former ages were justly esteemed the ablest performers in Christendom. But to our unspeakable grief, we find of late a very sensible decay of that true old English vigour, our gallants being every way so Frenchified that they are become mere cock-sparrows, fluttering things that come on sa-sa with a world of fury, but are not able to stand to it, and in the very first charge fall down flat before us. Never did men wear greater breeches or carry less in them of any metal whatsoever. There was a glorious dispensation, 'twas surely in the golden age, when lusty lads of 700 or 800 years old got sons and daughters. And we have read how a prince of Spain was forced to make a law that men should not repeat the grand kindness to their wives above 9 times a night. But, alas, alas, those forward days are gone. The dull lubbers want a spur now rather than a bridle, being so far from doing any works of supererogation that we find them not capable of performing those devoirs which their duty and our expectations exact. The occasion of which insufferable disaster, after a furious enquiry and discussion of the point by the learned of the faculty, we can attribute to nothing more than the excessive use of that new-fangled, abominable, heathenish liquor called coffee, which riffling nature of her choicest treasures, and drying up the radical moisture, has so eunuched our husbands, and cripple our more kind gallants, that they are become as impotent as age, and as unfruitful as those desarts whence that unhappy berry is said to be brought. For the continual flipping of this pitiful drink is enough to bewitch men of 22 and tie up the codpiece points without a charm. It renders them that us it as lean as famine, as rivalled as envy, or an old meagre hag overridden by an incubus. They come from it with nothing moist but their snotty noses, nothing stiff but their joints, nor standing but their ears. They pretend 'twill keep them waking, but we find by scurvy experience they sleep quietly enough after it. A betrothed queen might trust herself abed with one of them, without the nice caution of a sword between them. Nor can call all the art we use revive them from this lethargy, so unfit they are for action, that like young train bandmen, when called upon duty, their ammunition is wanting. Peradventure they present, but cannot give fire, or at least do but flash in the pan, instead of doing executions. Nor let any doting, superstitious Catos shake their goatish beards, and task us of immodesty for this declaration, since 'tis a public grievance, and cries aloud for reformation. Weight and measures, 'tis well known, should go throughout the world, and there is no torment like famishment. Experience witnesses our damage, and necessity, which easily supersedes all the laws of decency, justifies our complaints. For can any woman of sense or spirit endure with patience that when privileged by legal ceremonies, she approaches the nuptial bed, expecting a man that with sprightly embraces should answer the vigour of her flames, she on the contrary should only meet a bed full of bones, and hug a meagre useless corpse rendered as sapless as a Kix, and drier than a pumice stone, by the perpetual fumes of tobacco, and bewitching effects of this most pernicious coffee, whereby nature is enfeebled, the offspring of our mighty ancestors dwindled into a succession of apes and pygmies, and the age of man now cramped into an inch that was a span. Nor is this, though more than enough, all the ground of our complaint, for besides we have reason to apprehend and grow jealous, that men by frequenting these Stygian tap-houses, will usurp on our prerogative of tattling, and soon learn to exceed us in talkativeness, a quality wherein our sex has ever claimed preeminence. For here, like so many frogs in a puddle, they sup muddy water, and murmur insignificant notes, till half a dozen of them outbabble an equal number of us at gossiping, talking all at once in confusion, and running from point to point as insensibly and swiftly as ever the ingenious pole-wheel could run divisions on the bass viol. Yet, in all their prattle, every one abounds in his own sense, as stiffly as a Quaker at the late Barbican dispute, and submits to the reasons of no other mortal, so that there being neither moderator nor rules observed, you must as soon fill a quart-pot with syllogisms as profit by their discourses. Certainly, our countrymen's palates are become as fantastical as their brains. How else is it possible they should apostatize from the good old primitive way of ale-drinking, to run a whoring after such variety of destructive foreign liquors, to trifle away their time, scald their chops, and spend their money, all for a little base, black, thick, nasty, bitter, stinking, nauseous puddle water? Yet, as all witches have their charms, so this ugly Turkish enchantress by certain invisible viers attracts both rich and poor, so that those have a scarce twopence to buy their children bread must spend a penny each evening in this insipid stuff. Nor can we send one of our husbands to call a midwife, or borrow a glister pipe, but he must stay an hour by the way, drinking his 2 dishes and 2 pipes. At these houses, as at the springs in Afric, meet all sorts of animals, whence follows the production of 1,000 monster opinions and absurdities. Yet, for being dangerous to government, we dare to be their compurgators, as well knowing them to be too tame and too talkative to make any desperate politicians. For though they may now and then destroy a fleet, or kill 10,000 of the French, more than all the Confederates can do, yet this is still in their politic capacities, for by their personal valor they are scarce fit to be of the life-guard to a cherry-tree, and therefore, though they frequently have hot contests about most important subjects, as what colour the Red Sea is of, whether the Great Turk be a Lutheran or a Calvinist, who Cain's father-in-law was, etc., yet they never fight about them with any other save our weapon, the tongue. Some of our sots pretend tippling of this boiled soot cures them of being drunk, but we have reason rather to conclude it makes them so, because we find them not able to stand after it. 'Tis at best but a kind of earthing a fox to hunt him more eagerly afterward, a rare method of good husbandry to enable a man to be drunk 3 times a day. Just such a remedy for drunkenness, as the Pope's allowing of stews, is a means to prevent fornication. The coffee-house being, in truth, only a pimp to the tavern, a relishing foop preparative to a fresh debauch. For when people have swilled themselves with a morning draught of more ale than a brewer's horse can carry, hither they come for a pennyworth of settle-brain, when they are sure to meet enow lazy pragmatical companions that resort here to prattle of news that they neither understand nor are concerned in. And after an hour's impertinent chat, begin to consider a bottle of claret would do excellent well before dinner, whereupon to the bush they all march together, till every one of them is as drunk as a drum, and then back again to the coffee-house, to drink themselves sober, where 3 or 4 dishes apiece, and smoking, makes their throats as dry as Mount Etna inflamed with brimflame, for that they must away to the next red lattice, to quench them with a dozen or 2 of ale, which at last, growing nauseous, one of them begins to extol the blood of the grape, what rare langoon and racy canary may be had at the Mitre. Sayest thou so? Cries another. Let's then go and replenish there with our earthen vessels. So once more they troop to the sack shop till they are drunker than before, and then by a retrograde motion stagger back to soberize themselves with coffee. Thus, like tennis balls between 2 rackets, the fops our husbands are bandied to and fro all day between the coffee-house and tavern, whilst we poor souls sit moping all alone till 12 at night, and when at last they come to bed, fenoked like a Westphalia hogshead, we have no more comfort of them than from a shotten herring or a dried bulrush, which forces us to take up this lamentation, and sing, Tom Farthing, where hast thou been, Tom Farthing? 12 o'clock ere you come in, 2 o'clock ere you begin, and then at last can do nothing, would make a woman weary, would make a woman weary, etc. Wherefore, the premises considered, and to the end that our just rights may be restored, and all the ancient privileges of our sex preserved inviolable, that our husbands may give us some other testimonial of their being men besides their beards and wearing of empty pantaloons, that they no more run the hazard of being cuckolded by dildos, but returning to the good old strengthening liquors of our forefathers, that nature's exchequer may once again be replenished, and a race of lusty heres begot, able by their achievements to equal the glories of our ancestors. We humbly pray that you, our trusty patrons, would improve your interest, that henceforth the drinking coffee may on severe penalties be forbidden to all persons under the age of 80, and that instead thereof lusty nappy beer, cock ale, cordial canaries, restoring malagos, and back-recruiting chocolate be recommended to general use throughout the Utopian territories. In hopes of which glorious reformation, your petitioners shall readily prostrate themselves, and ever pray, etc. Finis. End of The Women's Petition Against Coffee. Recording by Rosie.
The men's answer to the women's petition against coffee, vindicating their own performances and the virtues of that liquor from the undeserved aspersions lately cast upon them by their scandalous pamphlet, published anonymously in London in 1674. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Patrick Wallace. The Men's Answer to the Women's Petition Against Coffee. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection No. 6. Could it be imagined that ungrateful women, after so much laborious drudgery both by day and night, and the best of our blood and spirits spent in your service, you should thus publicly complain? Certain we are that there never was age or nation more indulgent to your sex. Have we not condescended to all the methods of debauchery, invented more postures than Aretine ever dreamed of, been pimps to our own wives, and courted gallants even with the hazard of our estates, to do us the civility of making us not only contented, but most obliged cuckolds? Is he thought worthy to be esteemed a gentleman that has not 7 times passed the torrid zone of a venereal distemper, or does not maintain at least a brace of mistresses? Talk not to us of those doting fumblers of 700 or 800 years old. A lark is better than a kite, and cock-sparrows, though not long-lived, are undoubtedly preferable for the work of generation before dull ravens, though some think they live 300 years. That our island is a paradise for women is verified still by the brisk activity of our men, who with an equal contempt scorn Italian padlocks and defy French dildos, knowing that a small dose of nature's quintessence satisfies better in a female limbeck than the largest potion infused by art. Let silly cits complain never so much that Madam Money is dead and buried. We dare appeal to all the commissioners of Whetstone's Park, the suburb runners and Moorfields night walkers, if ever they had better trading. Nay, have we not forced languishing nature by preparations of cantharides, smiced meats, anchovies, cullises, jelly broths, lambstones, diasatyrion, Bononia sausages, etc., all to answer the height of your amorous passions, and prevent the pitiful lechery of an artificial trangin? Have we not, with excess of patience, borne your affronts, been sweated, purged, fluxed between 2 feather beds, flogged, gibed, and endured all the rest of the devil's martyrdoms? And will you still offer to repine? Certainly experienced Solomon was in the right when he told us that the grave and the womb were equally insatiable. But why must innocent coffee be the object of your spleen? That harmless and healing liquor, which indulgent Providence first sent amongst us at a time when brimmers of rebellion and fanatic zeal had intoxicated the nation, and we wanted a drink at once to make us sober and merry. 'Tis not this incomparable settle-brain that shortens nature's standard, or makes us less active in the sports of Venus, and we wonder you should take these exceptions, since so many of the little houses, with the Turkish woman straddling on their signs, are but emblems of what is to be done within for your conveniences, mere nurseries to promote the petulant trade, and breed up a stock of hopeful plants for the future service of the Republic in the most thriving mysteries of debauchery. There being scarce a coffee hut but affords a tawdry woman, a wanton daughter, or a buxom maid to accommodate customers. And can you think that any of which frequent such discipline can be wanting in their pastures or defective in their arms? The news we chat of there, you will not think it impertinent when you consider the fair opportunities you have thereby of entertaining an obliging friend in our absence. And how many of us you have dubbed Knights of the Bull Feather, whilst we have sat innocently sipping the devil's holy water. We do not call it so for driving the cacodemon of lechery out of us, for the truth is, it rather assists us for your nocturnal benevolences, by drying up those crude flatulent humours, which would otherwise make us only flash in the pan, without doing that thundering execution which your expectations exact. We dare appeal to experience in the case. Coffee is the general drink throughout Turkey and those eastern regions, and yet no part of the world can boast more able or eager performers than those circumcised gentlemen, who, like our modern gallants, own no other joys of heaven than what consists in venereal titillations. The physical qualities of this liquor are almost innumerable, and its virtues, if you will believe Pointing, able to out-noise the quack-bill of an all-healing doctor, when your kindness at the Close-Hag has bestowed on us a virulent gonorrhea. This is our Catholicon, ens naturae, and aqua tetrachimagogon is an ass to it. 'Tis base adulterate wine and surcharges of muddy ale that enfeeble nature, makes a man as salacious as a goat and yet as impotent as age, whereas coffee collects and settles the spirit, makes the erection more vigorous, the ejaculation more full, adds a spiritualescency to the sperm, and renders it more firm and suitable to the gusto of the womb, and proportionate to the ardours and expectation too of the female paramour. As for our taking tobacco, you have no reason to object, since most of your own sex are so well skilled in managing a pipe, and if you find that of your husband's to be naught, 'tis his natural infirmity, or your own perpetual pumping him not drinking coffee, is the occasion of the defect, and therefore let such Tom Farthings be forbidden the decoction of the rare Arabian berry, and condemned everlastingly with the rest of Doolittle's congregation to the carrying of glister pipes for the use of the well-effected sisterhood. You may well permit us to talk abroad, for at home we have scarce time to utter a word for the insufferable din of your ever-active tongues. The foolish extravagances of our lives are infinitely outdone by the wild frolics of yours. Till noon you lie abed, hatching concupiscence, then having paid your adorations to the ugly idol in the glass, you descend to dinner, where you gourmandize enough at one meal to famish a town besieged. After that you are called out by a cousin, and hurried out in his honour's coach, whose jogging serves as a preparative to your lechery, away to the playhouse, where a lascivious dance, a bawdy song, and the petulant gallant's tickling of your hand having made an insurrection in your blood, you go to allay it with an evening's exercise at the tavern. There you spend freely, yet being robbed of nothing we can miss, home you come in a railing humour, and at last give us nothing for supper but a buttered bun. Cease then for the future your clamours against our civil follies. Alas, alas, dear hearts, the coffee-house is the citizen's academy, where he learns more wit than ever his granum taught him, the young gallant's stage where he displays the wardrobe of his excellent no-parts. 'Tis the non-con's bull-baiting, the newsmonger's exchange, the fool's business, the knave's ambuscade, and the wise man's recreation. Here it is where we have the sparkling cider, the mighty mum, and the back-recruiting chocolate. 'Tis coffee that both keeps us sober, or can make us so. And let our wives that hereafter shall presume to petition against it be confined to lie alone all night, and in the daytime drink nothing but bonny clabber. End of The Men's Answer to the Women's Petition against Coffee, published anonymously in 1674. Read by Patrick Wallace. The Virtues of Chocolate and the Properties of Cave, an advertising pamphlet published in 1660 in Oxford. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Patrick Wallace. The Virtues of Chocolate and the Properties of Cave. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection, No. 6. The Virtues of Chocolate, East India Drink. By this pleasing drink health is preserved, sickness diverted. It cures consumptions and cough of the lungs. It expels poison, cleanseth the teeth, and sweeteneth the breath, provoketh urine, cureth the stone and strangury, maketh fat and corpulent, fair and amiable. It cureth the running of the reins with sundry other desperate diseases. It causeth conception, according to these verses. Nor need the women longer grieve, who spend their oil, yet not conceive. For 'tis a help immediate, if such but lick of chocolate. Beauty gained and continued, as this verse speaketh. The nut-brown lasses of the land, whom nature veiled in face and hand, are quickly beauties of high rate, by one small draught of chocolate. It is impossible to enumerate all new and admirable effects then producing every day in such as drink it. Therefore I'll leave the judgment of it to those who daily make a continual proof of it. The Properties of Cave, Egypt Drink. It perfectly cureth the consumption, gout, spleen, dropsy, sore eyes, and all that are troubled with rheums. It immediately taketh away the headache. It procureth appetite and helps digestion. And for students or others who are to sit up late, or all night, they drinking about 2 or 3 pennyworth of it about their usual time of going to bed, or when they begin to grow sleepy and drowsy, it will cheer and comfort their spirits and make them lively, and fit for their employment, and have no drowsiness to come upon them all night after. It is incomparable good for those that are troubled with melancholy, and excellent to keep women from miscarrying, and very good for them that never had children. It is also excellent to kill worms in young or old, to dry all manner of tetters, ringworms, or any other evils. The steam of it is good against dim, watery, or bloodshed eyes. It would be too tedious to nominate everything it is good for, therefore I forbear. These drinks are to be sold by James Goff at Mr. Surrey's near Eastgate. End of The Virtues of Chocolate, the Properties of Cave, an advertising pamphlet, published in Oxford in 1660, read by Patrick Wallace.
The Magic Bonbons by L. Frank Baum, from his collection American Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Magic Bonbons. There lived in Boston a wise and ancient chemist by the name of Dr. Dawes, who dabbled somewhat in magic. There also lived in Boston a young lady by the name of Claribel Sudds, who was possessed of much money, little wit, and an intense desire to go upon the stage. So Claribel went to Dr. Dawes and said, "I can neither sing nor dance, I cannot recite verse nor play upon the piano. I am no acrobat, nor leaper, nor high kicker, yet I wish to go upon the stage. What shall I do?" "Are you willing to pay for such accomplishments?" asked the wise chemist. "Certainly," answered Claribel, jingling her purse. "Then come to me tomorrow at 2 o'clock," said he. All that night he practised what is known as chemical sorcery, so that when Claribel Sudds came next day at 2 o'clock, he showed her a small box filled with compounds that closely resembled French bonbons. "This is a progressive age," said the old man, "and I flatter myself your Uncle Dawes keeps right along with the procession. Now one of your old-fashioned sorcerers would have made you some nasty bitter pills to swallow, but I have consulted your taste and convenience. Here are some magic bonbons. If you eat this one with the lavender color, you can dance thereafter as lightly and gracefully as if you had been trained a lifetime. After you consume the pink confection, you will sing like a nightingale. Eating the white one will enable you to become the finest elocutionist in the land. The chocolate piece will charm you into playing the piano better than Rubinstein, while after eating your lemon yellow bonbon you can easily kick 6 feet above your head." "How delightful!" exclaimed Claribel, who was truly enraptured. "You are certainly a most clever sorcerer as well as a considerate compounder," and she held out her hand for the box. "Ahem!" said the wise one. "A check, please." "Oh, yes, to be sure. How stupid of me to forget it," she returned. He considerately retained the box in his own hand while she signed a check for a large amount of money, after which he allowed her to hold the box herself. "Are you sure you have made them strong enough?" she inquired anxiously. "It usually takes a great deal to affect me." "My only fear," replied Dr. Dawes, "is that I have made them too strong, for this is the first time I have ever been called upon to prepare these wonderful confections." "Don't worry," said Claribel. "The stronger they act, the better I shall act myself." She went away after saying this, but stopping in at a dry goods store to shop, she forgot the precious box in her new interest and left it lying on the ribbon counter. Then little Bessie Bostwick came along to the counter to buy a hair ribbon and laid her parcels beside the box. When she went away she gathered up the box with her other bundles and trotted off home with it. Bessie never knew, until after she had hung her coat in the hall closet and counted up her parcels, that she had one too many. Then she opened it and exclaimed, "Why, it's a box of candy! Someone must have mislaid it. But it is too small a matter to worry about. There are only a few pieces." So she dumped the contents of the box into a bonbon dish that stood upon the hall table, and picking out the chocolate piece, she was fond of chocolates, ate it daintily while she examined her purchases. These were not many, for Bessie was only 12 years old and was not yet trusted by her parents to expend much money at the stores. But while she tried on the hair ribbons she suddenly felt a great desire to play upon the piano, and the desire at last became so overpowering that she went into the parlor and opened the instrument. The little girl had with infinite pains contrived to learn 2 pieces, which she usually executed with a jerky movement of her right hand and a left hand that forgot to keep up and so made dreadful discords. But under the influence of the chocolate bonbons she sat down and ran her fingers lightly over the keys, producing such exquisite harmony that she was filled with amazement at her own performance. That was the prelude, however. The next moment she dashed into Beethoven's 7th Sonata and played it magnificently. Her mother, hearing the unusual burst of melody, came downstairs to see what musical guest had arrived. But when she discovered it was her own little daughter who was playing so divinely, she had an attack of palpitation of the heart, to which she was subject, and sat down upon a sofa until it should pass away. Meanwhile Bessie played one piece after another with untiring energy. She loved music, and now found that all she need do was sit at the piano and listen and watch her hands twinkle over the keyboard. Twilight deepened in the room, and Bessie's father came home and hung up his hat and overcoat and placed his umbrella in the rack. Then he peeped into the parlor to see who was playing. "Great Caesar!" he exclaimed. But the mother came to him softly, with her finger on her lips, and whispered, "Don't interrupt her, John. Our child seems to be in a trance. Did you ever hear such superb music?" "Why, she's an infant prodigy!" gasped the astounded father. "Beats Blind Tom all hollow. It's wonderful!" As they stood listening, the senator arrived, having been invited to dine with them that evening, and before he had taken off his coat, the Yale professor, a man of deep learning and scholarly attainments, joined the party. Bessie played on, and the four elders stood in a huddled but silent and amazed group, listening to the music and waiting for the sound of the dinner gong. Mr. Bostwick, who was hungry, picked up the bonbon dish that lay on the table beside him and ate the pink confection. The professor was watching him, so Mr. Bostwick courteously held the dish toward him. The professor ate the lemon-yellow piece, and the senator reached out his hand and took the lavender piece. He did not eat it, however, for chancing to remember that it might spoil his dinner, he put it in his vest pocket. Mrs. Bostwick, still intently listening to her precocious daughter, without thinking what she did, took the remaining piece, which was the white one, and slowly devoured it. The dish was now empty, and Claribel Sudd's precious bonbons had passed from her possession forever. Suddenly Mr. Bostwick, who was a big man, began to sing in a shrill, tremolo soprano voice. It was not the same song Bessie was playing, and the discord was so shocking that the professor smiled. The senator put his hands to his ears, and Mrs. Bostwick cried in a horrified voice, "William!" Her husband continued to sing as if endeavoring to emulate the famous Christine Nilsson, and paid no attention whatever to his wife or his guests. Fortunately, the dinner gong now sounded, and Mrs. Bostwick dragged Bessie from the piano and ushered her guests into the dining-room. Mr. Bostwick followed, singing "The Last Rose of Summer," as if it had been an encore demanded by 1,000 delighted hearers. The poor woman was in despair at witnessing her husband's undignified actions, and wondered what she might do to control him. The professor seemed more grave than usual. The senator's face wore an offended expression, and Bessie kept moving her fingers as if she still wanted to play the piano. Mrs. Bostwick managed to get them all seated, although her husband had broken into another aria, and then the maid brought in the soup. When she carried a plate to the professor, he cried in an excited voice, "Hold it higher! Higher, I say!" And springing up, he gave it a sudden kick that sent it nearly to the ceiling, from whence the dish descended to scatter soup over Bessie and the maid, and to smash in pieces upon the crown of the professor's bald head. At this atrocious act, the senator rose from his seat with an exclamation of horror, and glanced at his hostess. For some time Mrs. Bostwick had been staring straight ahead with a dazed expression, but now, catching the senator's eye, she bowed gracefully and began reciting "The Charge of the Light Brigade" in forceful tones. The senator shuddered. Such disgraceful rioting he had never seen nor heard before in a decent private family. He felt that his reputation was at stake, and being the only sane person apparently in the room, there was no one to whom he might appeal. The maid had run away to cry hysterically in the kitchen. Mr. Bostwick was singing "Oh, Promise Me." The professor was trying to kick the globes off the chandelier. Mrs. Bostwick had switched her recitation to "The Boy Stood on the Burning Deck," and Bessie had stolen into the parlor and was pounding out the overture from the Flying Dutchman. The senator was not at all sure he would not go crazy himself presently, so he slipped away from the turmoil, and catching up his hat and coat in the hall, hurried from the house. That night he sat up late writing a political speech he was to deliver the next afternoon at Funwheel Hall, but his experiences at the Bostwicks had so unnerved him that he could scarcely collect his thoughts, and often he would pause and shake his head pityingly as he remembered the strange things he had seen in that usually respectable home. The next day he met Mr. Bostwick in the street, but passed him by with a stony glare of oblivion. He felt he really could not afford to know this gentleman in the future. Mr. Bostwick was naturally indignant at the direct snub, yet in his mind lingered a faint memory of some quite unusual occurrences at his dinner party the evening before, and he hardly knew whether he dared resent the senator's treatment or not. The political meeting was the feature of the day, for the senator's eloquence was well known in Boston, so the big hall was crowded with people, and in one of the front rows sat the Bostwick family, with the learned Yale professor beside them. They all looked tired and pale, as if they had passed a rather dissipated evening, and the senator was rendered so nervous by seeing them that he refused to look in their direction a second time. While the mayor was introducing him, the great man sat fidgeting in his chair, and happening to put his thumb and finger into his vest pocket, he found the lavender-colored bonbon he had placed there the evening before. "This may clear my throat," thought the senator, and slipped the bonbon into his mouth. A few minutes afterwards he arose before the vast audience, which greeted him with enthusiastic plaudits. "My friends," began the senator in a grave voice, "this is a most impressive and important occasion." Then he paused, balanced himself upon his left foot, and kicked his right leg into the air in the way favored by ballet dancers. There was a hum of amazement and horror from the spectators, but the senator appeared not to notice it. He whirled around upon the tips of his toes, kicked right and left in a graceful manner, and startled a bald-headed man in the front row by casting a languishing glance in his direction. Suddenly Clarabelle Sudds, who happened to be present, uttered a scream and sprang to her feet. Pointing an accusing finger at the dancing senator, she cried in a loud voice, "That's the man who stole my bonbons! Seize him! Arrest him! Don't let him escape!" But the ushers rushed her out of the hall, thinking she had gone suddenly insane, and the senator's friends seized him firmly and carried him out the stage entrance to the street, where they put him into an open carriage and instructed the driver to take him home. The effect of the magic bonbon was still powerful enough to control the poor senator, who stood upon the rear seat of the carriage and danced energetically all the way home, to the delight of the crowd of small boys who followed the carriage, and the grief of the sober-minded citizens, who shook their heads sadly and whispered that another good man had gone wrong. It took the senator several months to recover from the shame and humiliation of this escapade, and curiously enough, he never had the slightest idea what had induced him to act in so extraordinary a manner. Perhaps it was fortunate the last bonbon had now been eaten, for they might easily have caused considerably more trouble than they did. Of course, Clarabelle went again to the wise chemist and signed a check for another box of magic bonbons, but she must have taken better care of these, for she is now a famous vaudeville actress. This story should teach us the folly of condemning others for actions that we do not understand, for we never know what may happen to ourselves. It may also serve as a hint to be careful about leaving parcels in public places, and, incidentally, to let other people's packages severely alone. End of The Magic Bonbons by L. Frank Baum. Read by Philip Martin.
The Lumber Room by Saki. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eric P. Kraft. The Lumber Room by Saki. From Beasts and Super Beasts. LibriVox Coffee Break Collection Number 6. The children were to be driven, as a special treat, to the sands at Jagborough. Nicholas was not to be of the party. He was in disgrace. Only that morning he had refused to eat his wholesome bread and milk on the seemingly frivolous ground that there was a frog in it. Older and wiser and better people had told him that there could not possibly be a frog in his bread and milk, and that he was not to talk nonsense. He continued, nevertheless, to talk what seemed the veriest nonsense, and described with much detail the coloration and markings of the alleged frog. The dramatic part of the incident was that there really was a frog in Nicholas's basin of bread and milk. He had put it there himself, so he felt entitled to know something about it. The sin of taking a frog from the garden and putting it into a bowl of wholesome bread and milk was enlarged on at great length, but the fact that stood out clearest in the whole affair, as it presented itself to the mind of Nicholas, was that the older, wiser, and better people had been proved to be profoundly in error in matters about which they had expressed the utmost assurance. "You said there couldn't possibly be a frog in my bread and milk. There was a frog in my bread and milk," he repeated with the insistence of a skilled tactician who does not intend to shift from favorable ground. So his boy cousin and girl cousin and his quite uninteresting younger brother were to be taken to Jagborough Sands that afternoon, and he was to stay home. His cousin's aunt, who insisted, by an unwarranted stretch of imagination, in styling herself his aunt also, had hastily invented the Jagborough expedition in order to impress on Nicholas the delights that he had justly forfeited by his disgraceful conduct at the breakfast table. It was her habit, whenever one of the children fell from grace, to improvise something of a festival nature from which the offender would be rigorously debarred. If all the children sinned collectively, they were suddenly informed of a circus in the neighboring town, a circus of unrivalled merit and uncounted elephants, to which, but for their depravity, they would have been taken that very day. A few decent tears were looked for on the part of Nicholas when the moment for the departure of the expedition arrived. As a matter of fact, however, all the crying was done by his girl cousin, who scraped her knee rather painfully against the step of the carriage as she was scrambling in. "How she did howl," said Nicholas cheerfully as the party drove off, without any of the elation of high spirits that should have characterized it. "She'll soon get over that," said the soi-disant aunt. "It will be a glorious afternoon for racing about over those beautiful sands. How they will enjoy themselves." "Bobby won't enjoy himself much, and he won't race much either," said Nicholas with a grim chuckle. "His boots are hurting him. They're too tight." "Why didn't he tell me they were hurting?" asked the aunt with some asperity. "He told you twice, but you weren't listening. You often don't listen when we tell you important things." "You are not to go into the gooseberry garden," said the aunt, changing the subject. "Why not?" demanded Nicholas. "Because you are in disgrace," said the aunt loftily. Nicholas did not admit the flawlessness of the reasoning. He felt perfectly capable of being in disgrace and in a gooseberry garden at the same moment. His face took on an expression of considerable obstinacy. It was clear to his aunt that he was determined to get into the gooseberry garden, only, as she remarked to herself, because I have told him he is not to. Now the gooseberry garden had 2 doors by which it might be entered, and once a small person like Nicholas could slip in there, he could effectually disappear from view amid the masking growth of artichokes, raspberry canes, and fruit bushes. The aunt had many other things to do that afternoon, but she spent an hour or two in trivial gardening operations among flower beds and shrubberies, whence she could keep a watchful eye on the 2 doors that led to the forbidden paradise. She was a woman of few ideas, with immense powers of concentration. Nicholas made 1 or 2 sorties into the front garden, wriggling his way with obvious stealth of purpose towards one or other of the doors, but never able for a moment to evade the aunt's watchful eye. As a matter of fact, he had no intention of trying to get into the gooseberry garden, but it was extremely convenient for him that his aunt should believe that he had. It was a belief that would keep her on self-imposed sentry duty for the greater part of the afternoon. Having thoroughly confirmed and fortified her suspicions, Nicholas slipped back into the house and rapidly put into execution a plan of action that had long germinated in his brain. By standing on a chair in the library, one could reach a shelf on which reposed a fat, important-looking key. The key was as important as it looked. It was the instrument which kept the mysteries of the lumber room secure from unauthorized intrusion, which opened a way only for aunts and such like privileged persons. Nicholas had not much experience of the art of fitting keys into keyholes and turning locks, but for some days past he had practiced with the key of the schoolroom door. He did not believe in trusting too much to luck and accident. The key turned stiffly in the lock, but it turned. The door opened, and Nicholas was in an unknown land, compared with which the gooseberry garden was a stale delight, a mere material pleasure. Often and often Nicholas had pictured to himself what the lumber-room might be like, that region that was so carefully sealed from youthful eyes and concerning which no questions were ever answered. It came up to his expectations. In the first place, it was large and dimly lit, one high window opening onto the forbidden garden being its only source of illumination. In the second place, it was a storehouse of unimagined treasures. The aunt by assertion was one of those people who think that things spoil by use and consign them to dust and damp by way of preserving them. Such parts of the house as Nicholas knew best were rather bare and cheerless, but here there were wonderful things for the eye to feast on. First and foremost, there was a piece of framed tapestry that was evidently meant to be a fire screen. To Nicholas it was a living, breathing story. He sat down on a roll of Indian hangings, glowing in wonderful colors beneath a layer of dust, and took in all the details of the tapestry picture. A man, dressed in the hunting costume of some remote period, had just transfixed a stag with an arrow. It could not have been a difficult shot, because the stag was only 1 or 2 paces away from him. In the thickly growing vegetation that the picture suggested, it would not have been difficult to creep up to a feeding stag, and the 2 spotted dogs that were springing forward to join in the chase had evidently been trained to keep to heel till the arrow was discharged. That part of the picture was simple, if interesting, but did the huntsman see what Nicholas saw, that 4 galloping wolves were coming in his direction through the wood? There might be more than 4 of them hidden behind the trees, and in any case would the man and his dogs be able to cope with the 4 wolves if they made an attack? The man had only 2 arrows left in his quiver, and he might miss with 1 or both of them. All one knew about his skill in shooting was that he could hit a large stag at a ridiculously short range. Nicholas sat for many golden minutes revolving the possibilities of the scene. He was inclined to think that there were more than 4 wolves, and that the man and his dogs were in a tight corner. But there were other objects of delight and interest claiming his instant attention. There were quaint twisted candlesticks in the shape of snakes, and a teapot fashioned like a china duck, out of whose open beak the tea was supposed to come. How dull and shapeless the nursery teapot seemed in comparison! And there was a carved sandalwood box packed tight with aromatic cotton wool, and between the layers of cotton wool were little brass figures, hump-necked bulls and peacocks and goblins, delightful to see and to handle. Less promising in appearance was a large square book with plain black covers. Nicholas peeped into it, and behold, it was full of colored pictures of birds. And such birds! In the garden and in the lanes when he went for a walk, Nicholas came across a few birds, of which the largest were an occasional magpie or wood pigeon. Here were herons and bustards, kites, toucans, tiger bitterns, brush turkeys, ibises, golden pheasants, a whole portrait gallery of undreamed-of creatures. And as he was admiring the coloring of the mandarin duck and assigning a life history to it, the voice of his aunt and shrill vociferation of his name came from the gooseberry garden without. She had grown suspicious at his long disappearance, and had leapt to the conclusion that he had climbed over the wall behind the sheltering screen of the lilac bushes. She was now engaged in energetic and rather hopeless search for him among the artichokes and raspberry canes. "Nicholas! Nicholas!" she screamed. "You are to come out of this at once. It's no use trying to hide there. I can see you all the time." It was probably the first time for 20 years that anyone had smiled in that lumber-room. Presently the angry repetitions of Nicholas's name gave way to a shriek, and a cry for somebody to come quickly. Nicholas shut the book, restored it carefully to its place in a corner, and shook some dust from a neighboring pile of newspapers over it. Then he crept from the room, locked the door, and replaced the key exactly where he had found it. His aunt was still calling his name when he sauntered into the front garden. "Who's calling?" he asked. "Me," came the answer from the other side of the wall. "Didn't you hear me? I've been looking for you in the gooseberry garden, and I've slipped into the rainwater tank. Luckily there's no water in it, but the sides are slippery and I can't get out. Fetch the little ladder from under the cherry tree." "I was told I wasn't to go into the gooseberry garden," said Nicholas promptly. "I told you not to, and now I tell you that you may," came the voice from the rainwater tank, rather impatiently. "Your voice doesn't sound like Aunt's," objected Nicholas. "You may be the evil one tempting me to be disobedient. Aunt often tells me that the evil one tempts me and that I always yield. This time I'm not going to yield." "Don't talk nonsense," said the prisoner in the tank. "Go and fetch the ladder." "Will there be strawberry jam for tea?" asked Nicholas innocently. "Certainly there will be," said the aunt, privately resolving that Nicholas should have none of it. "Now I know that you are the evil one and not Aunt," shouted Nicholas gleefully. "When we asked Aunt for strawberry jam yesterday, she said there wasn't any. I know there are 4 jars of it in the store cupboard because I looked, and of course you know it's there, but she doesn't because she said there wasn't any. Oh, devil, you have sold yourself." There was an unusual sense of luxury in being able to talk to an aunt as though one was talking to the evil one, but Nicholas knew, with childish discernment, that such luxuries were not to be overindulged in. He walked noisily away, and it was a kitchen maid, in search of parsley, who eventually rescued the aunt from the rainwater tank. Tea that evening was partaken of in a fearsome silence. The tide had been at its highest when the children had arrived at Jagborough Cove, so there had been no sands to play on, a circumstance that the aunt had overlooked in the haste of organizing her punitive expedition. The tightness of Bobby's boots had had disastrous effect on his temper the whole of the afternoon, and altogether the children could not have been said to have enjoyed themselves. The aunt maintained the frozen muteness of one who has suffered undignified and unmerited detention in a rainwater tank for 35 minutes. As for Nicholas, he too was silent, in the absorption of one who has much to think about. It was just possible, he considered, that the huntsman would escape with his hounds while the wolves feasted on the stricken stag. End of The Lumber Room by Saki. Read by Eric P. Kraft.